Good morning, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to this presentation where we're going to be talking about marketing and recruiting for online programs. So first, I'd like to welcome and introduce Kadish Franklin. He's the Director for Member Education and Research Delivery at EAB. Mr. Franklin has a deep knowledge of the impacts of higher education policy and institutional factors leading to post-secondary success for students. He's a noted author, researcher, speaker, and consultant. And there's additional information on the invitation that includes his brief bio, but I wanted to include some additional information about him that you might find interesting. So Kadish is one of 11 children, and twins are prevalent in his family. His dad is an identical twin, his older sisters are identical twins, and his younger sister is the mother of identical twins. Isn't that so
Don't marry.
Right.
Note to self.
No, I'm kidding.
He was also the drum major for his high school marching band, and he attended middle school with Chelsea Clinton. So without further ado, I'd like you all to welcome Kadish Franklin.
So Trina asked me for fun facts, and I wasn't sure how they were going to be used. I was like, are we going to play some sort of icebreaker? What's going to happen? So then I sent them, and she's like, no, I'm just going to read them to everybody, so now you guys all know a little bit about me. That's nice. Good morning again.
Good morning.
I'm not going to work together well if you all attended. Good morning again. Good morning. You guys heard research and you thought this guy's going to bore us to death for 2 hours and talk to us and we'll stare at him. That's not going to happen. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to have what I call a conversation. So I know you guys see a man in the suit, PowerPoint presentation, like he's just going to talk to us. We're actually going to talk to each other. There's just as much knowledge and information in this room as I have in this presentation. So that's very, very important to our conversation today. I know we have a number of people who are on the line, so normally I would just like to introduce you all and figure out who you all were, but because we have people in both places, I won't do that. But I want to take 2 minutes and do something. Find a partner in the room, wherever you want, and tell me in 2 minutes why we should have this conversation right now. What's the point? Why am I here? 2 minutes, find a partner in the room, anybody you want. That includes you all who are on the line. Take 2 minutes and tell me why we should have this conversation right now. 2 minutes, go.
Hey, I'm Bryce.
Hey.
You hear me?
We have one.
Yeah.
Why should we have this conversation now?
But I said we also come to the main quality is going to bring
So I'm here because I work in the homeschool and we are integrating a new, implementing new integrated that can even be taken in courthouse and so the focus of that are traditional students. So like more schools become accredited, it's harder and harder to attract students. So you need to figure out
can't just sell them a bunch of
I think that's a good one. So and just how to
Take about 30 seconds to finish up. 30
I
seconds.
think we know some of the stuff that makes it.
So remember,
How does this work in science and to get that stuff out there and recruit some of these people? Yeah, and so, and that's the other thing, is there's 5 different programs, at least the one I'm thinking of, we have a professional mix for this one after, right? So there's 5 different departments that have those.
yeah,
Trying to
okay.
figure out each of those and
What's this? I'd like to give us a minute to check the volume before we get started and get deep into it.
I don't feel like that.
so I don't know a lot about it other than it makes sense to me.
All right. I get everybody's attention back to the front. So what'd you come up with? Why have this conversation right now?
Program growth.
Program growth, so you want to grow your programs? Why else?
Programs are becoming more competitive every day. So
That's right, this market is crowded, it's more difficult to compete. What else?
We've noticed too that our audience is more educated about, you can tell like when we post things online, they'll say, well, this university's charging this much for the same unit, like they know even like down to the courses and
The
stuff.
way students shop for these credentials now has changed dramatically around us, right? So like, we can't ask them to put information into a contact thing and then we give them information they know already in advance.
Yeah.
That's absolutely correct. What else? Yes?
Retention.
Retention, tell me more about that.
Well, you you want to keep them there once you've actually got them started?
That's right. It's
How do you
easier to keep
that
a.
in our program?
So I'm from Little Rock, so I'm going to share with you all local stories, right? So I call it a BIS number, B-I-S, BIS number, right? Bud and seat, right? It's easier to keep a bud and seat that you've got than a new bud, right? So absolutely correct. Retention is very strong for marketing. Yes.
To build on that, I think we have to be proactive in retention
That's
rather
right.
than reactive.
Tell me more about what you mean by that.
Well, we can't, the only touch point can't be the course they happen to be in and the instructor in the course. I think someone needs to be tracking if they're registering regularly, if they're not registered, to touch base with them and stuff. If they were on campus, they'd be touch points, but, when they're at work or at home, there's no touch point. If they don't hear from us, and they're not currently active in a course,
That's exactly right.
It's empty.
Isn't that life cycle work, right? This idea that we need to be in contact with students across the period of engagement, whether they're in a class or not. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Why else have this conversation other than there's a funny man in a little suit at the front of the room? You don't want to do today. Why have this chat? Also, retention. We got retention. We've got growing programs. We've got increased competition. Is that it?
Okay, well, one other thing that we've toyed with a little bit and haven't done as much as we would like, mostly because the support infrastructure isn't there to do it, is how can we have touch points with online students beyond a course? For example, we've talked about, should we have like a welcome session, interactive video or something that at least is optional for all students who are starting in the fall or something, to touch bases and introduce our faculty, or, are there other ways that we might engage students beyond just the online experience?
So this question of, is there a way to level set? Should we start everybody at the same
Right.
place? You Smith, you have your hand up?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, keeping them progressing through the program.
Right, so they
So
go
actually
back to, but this but also I would say that beyond just retention, right? So I'll use marketing language now, right? It's easier to create a repeat buyer when they're in seat, and we know what is the number one form of marketing. We can keep talking about who does this. This is technology. So what's the number one form of marketing?
Advertising.
Word of mouth, right? And if you have a person who's in seat and they have a bad experience, what do? Tell everybody they ever met, including people at the grocery store, right? And so that means that marketing absolutely starts what's happening in the classroom, that's for sure. What else?
Should I tell?
It's easier to let the data help us make decisions than just use anecdotes or the one-offs to help us drop where we need to go.
That's exactly right. So I think she might have read my bio, so she said one of my favorite words, data. Right, but we're going to use, but I'll move that to information. Right, using information to guide what we decide to do, as opposed to, I once heard from one student 20 years down the road that they like that, so they want to do that. Yeah, absolutely correct. Okay. So I want to do a couple of housekeeping things before we jump into the content. First thing, if you haven't noticed in our 2 minutes together, I talk fast. Not sort of fast, not kind of fast, very, very fast. As I get more excited about this topic, I'm going to talk even faster, as you can imagine. You can also imagine I might have heard that before, but I want you to share with me again. If you say something too fast or go too quickly, let me know. I'm happy to repeat, make a same face, whatever you need to do. The other thing is, I'm a recovering academic, and what I mean by that is that there's all other recovering academics, and I call all my content presentations the impossible group, right? If you're a faculty member, you know how this works. There's more than this you can possibly cover in 2 hours. I did that on purpose. This is going to be available to everyone in this room electronically the minute I get done talking. Don't feel the need to take a picture of it or to scribble down thousands of notes. Stay in the conversation. We'll have access to it. I have too much up here on purpose because you'll need some stuff to leave behind after we talk to really think through what's next. That leads me to the last piece. How many people have ever been to an office brainstorming session? On staff retreat, we got sticky notes on the board, stuff on the wall, right? What happens when you go back to your desk after that? Anybody want to admit what happened? All same thing. Nothing. The same thing you were doing before you left, maybe the stuff you're doing on your cell phone while I'm talking. Let's all agree that we won't do that. And what I mean by that is this. There is a lot here. You couldn't possibly do all of this tomorrow, but let's all agree that there's something at South Carolina. You know what? I'm going to get up on South Carolina. Let's say you all are doing it right. There's something a Little House on the Prairie State that people can do better, right? And we're going to all acknowledge that there's something that we could do differently as a result of this conversation. Otherwise, there's no point. You guys can go off this brainstorm on your own. You don't need me to do that. But there must be something that we can do differently. That's why we're having this conversation. Can we all agree to that? Next thing, after you save your questions to the slide I have at the end, like every good presenter that says question and answer, it will be 12:01. I'll be the last thing in between you and her, and someone will attack you as you ask a 20-point question that period. What that means is, when you feel moved by a question at any point in this presentation, stop and ask it then. I'm happy to stay after and answer questions. Your colleagues may not be. Monitor and adjust to that, right? And the last thing is there's a lot of data points here, and there are a lot of academics out there. As a recovering academic, I understand how this works. If you find some challenge with my data or you want to fight it out, please do. We'll still part as friends, but we can't move forward unless we all agree where we're starting. So if there's a data point you want to ask more questions about or want to fight me on, let's do it. Happy to. Other than that, I'm ready to get started. About you guys. Ready to go? Let's do it. So, EAB, how many people are familiar with who we are as a company? Or have heard about us before? I've got 2.5 hands, so I'm going to do a quick elevator. We think about the university across what we also would call a life cycle. So moving from enrollment, getting the students in the door, student success once they're there, how do we keep them there and make them successful? And in institutional success, how do we put all that together to make sure that institutions can be more successful? We have about 1,500 institutional members. We call our, what you might think about if you're thinking about a consulting firm, clients, we call it ours members. The 1,500 members, and if you think about that from the United States, we have about 4,000 universities. We're covering quite a bit of them. And I would say we cover every type of institution, from Harvard to the smallest community college you've ever visited. And because I travel every day for work, I have been to every type of those institutions. We share here how we touch students. And I think one of the things that's most interesting about this is that each year, through our technology and research, we touch about 3.7 million students in the United States. So we have a wide sense and a wide depth and breadth of our work that touches students across the life cycle of all institutions. And I would say the thing that's most interesting and the thing I would focus on the most about our work is that everything that we do is rooted in what we call best practices research. Now, this is a little bit different than we think about academic research. And the thing I think is most different about that is we try to think about practices across institutions and say, if we scrub them down to their most common denominator, what parts of them could be scalable? This isn't what I would call, we often do what I call a conference presentation program in a box. This thing says, look out in the career space, we just did that, that will say, this is not that. So just thinking about this much more deeply to say, what can we do across all institutions? And if we could adopt some of these best practices, how can we move the needle on higher education practices? So that's where our work is based. If you want more information about the company, I'm here. Allison, you want to introduce yourself to everyone?
Hey guys, I met a couple of you walking in, but my name is Allison Major. My role is basically, as Kadesh mentioned, to help all of you at USC maximize all of the research resources that you have access to. So we will send this to you in follow-up, but if you have questions or needs, I'll make sure that you guys have my contact information. I want to make sure that you're really getting maximum value out of everything that you have access to. It's wonderful to meet all of you.
Let's run through the concept for a second. So what I'm trying to do here on this slide is pretty ambitious. I've tried to cover the history of marketing in the United States on a single slide. I think I did okay, but let's walk through it and see. So we start in terms of thinking about marketing when we start with thinking about differentiating on product. We've all heard this comment before. You can have any color Model T as long as it's black. How can Henry Ford get away with that?
Only game in town.
Only game in town, right? So it was either that or horse and buggy. And for a long time in higher ed, especially in the online market, which is where this research rolls out, that's where we were, right? We were the first entrant to the market. We could compete on that. So then we weren't thinking a lot about crowded markets and how to market. We had the only thing that you could get access to. So if you move over, people familiar with the show Mad Men? Lots of folks, smoking rooms, women in short skirts, running with papers around. But this space in marketing, where you differentiated on brand reach, if we could just explain to more people in the best marketing possible what we had to offer, we could then bring in more customers. And I would argue that most of higher ed still lives here. So I would use the example of this. Glossy magazines, students on a grassy knoll, beautiful buildings, our faculty are the best at this. Seen anything like that? Not here, because you guys do it all right. But Little House on the Prairie State is still marketing themselves. When in fact, marketing and customers have moved on to what I would call the Amazon model. Now, how many people have ever been on the phone before? You're talking to someone, not searching anything. Talking to someone, you mention an item or a product. You get off of the phone, you go to Facebook, you go to YouTube, an advertisement for that thing shows up. Yes? People, I call that the stalker marketing model. You have to remember that the folks that we're serving now have lived in this space, what we're calling differentiating on customer intimacy their entire life. I use a second example. I love Amazon. I have to own that I get an Amazon package probably twice a week. But you go on Amazon.com, you are about ready to check out, but then it gives you a list. Here are products for people like you. Whole list of things that people like you or people who bought the same thing that you purchased have purchased as well. I have about 170 products of things for people like you that I did not intend to buy, that I got because it was listed to me there. Do you all know that a student who's logged into their Gmail account can go to Google and say institutions for students like me, or MBA programs for students like me, and a full list will pop up of schools that they should consider based on what they research, based on what's in their email, based on who their friends are on social media. People are being marketed to in ways that are much more specific to who they are and what they do than we have caught on to. So I'd ask you all a question. If you were going to put your marketing strategies into one of these three buckets, where would you put them? The church silence. I'll tell you all another secret. I do this every day. I'll ask you questions, and it's up to you to decide to answer. It'll be awkward for you, not for me. I'll stand up here and have a drink of water. You guys can treat it like math class. I've taught math before. Stare at the board, your shoes, each other, whatever. But someone will feel moved to stare. Where would you put them? In South Carolina.
I think we're kind of like on the dotted line that you have there.
Tell me more.
We try, we're like, yeah, we need to do that. We do like one thing that kind of is differentiating on customer intimacy. And then all of a sudden like, but we have to go print our brochure real quick. Yeah, so it's like we're not quite ready to give up. Literally, that's a conversation we had this week.
I'm going to give you a strategy for how you can let it go. No. Now, I know everyone doesn't believe me that you can let go of the printed brochure, but I'm going to promise you there's a strategy that you can use to wean yourself off of it. I'm not going to ask you to give it up tomorrow, but I hear you.
Yeah.
Who else would put some in the dotted line or other places?
I think it varies by department.
I think so, too. Tell me more about what you mean by that, though.
I think you have some very far-reaching, far-thinking departments that are definitely on the customer intimacy side, the Amazon side, and are striving for that. And then you do have some that are still on differentiating on products.
That's right. Now, no one owned it. You still got some folks in this first horse and buggy bottom, right? So yeah, that's true, I think. The thing that's interesting about it being differentiated by department is this, right? 50% of students who are going to search out your institution are going to look first at the program. Did you all know that? And as students get older, that percentage goes up. So most of us think about marketing from the perspective of South Carolina or South Carolina Online. Students are not thinking about marketing in that way. What percentage of students do you all think, and I'm going to talk about this later, do their own research, have no contact with you, and your first contact with them is when they apply? I'll say it again. You have no contact with them. They do their own individual independent research. Your first knowledge of them is when they actually apply to the institution. What percentage of students would you put into that bucket?
60 or 70?
75%.
It's almost 80%. But here's the question. If our marketing is all driven under the idea that students are going to communicate with us or engage with us in some real high-touch way, what does that set us up for? Say it again? Or extreme risk. I won't say failure, right? Because you might catch a couple students, but it puts you at extreme risk. I'm going to talk to you about how that shows up, though, and what we think are the 4 differentiators in our market that are causing us to need to have this conversation. The first is what I was just talking about, this evolution of the student shopper behavior. Students' ways of shopping has changed dramatically. I think in online we know this, but we don't fully embrace all of what that means. The next thing is the proliferation of new technology and channels. I would also include their vendors, right? There's a lot that you can do, and a lot of people are selling things to you. How do you know which works best and where to go with that information? The next is the market is more crowded and sophisticated. We're not competing in the ways that we once thought we were, and our competitors aren't who we always think they were. And that's changing dramatically over time as people run into the market to find new students and find new populations. And then the last are these advancements of marketing competencies that we don't always internalize at the institution. So the decision that we're trying to make on, should we have folks who work at South Carolina who do this full time? Should we contract out? And what's the balance of that? And institutions are thinking about that pretty broadly. One of the things that we find interesting about websites are that they don't create the kinds of conversations that we once thought they did. Before we thought that we had this funnel that's here on the right, where we would have a student who'd be a prospect. They would inquire in some way, and often that's usually through a contact form. We would converse with them, so we'd have some high-touch interaction with them. They would make a decision to apply, and then subsequently enroll if they were admitted. When in fact, the way that students shop online now has taken out inquire and converse. Students are just showing up, and what we call this is the stealth student. So students are just showing up to your institution. You have them not on any this list of name buys. They've never shared your contact information. Now they're an applicant. How can you market to them to choose you as opposed to the other 3 places they applied? Because that's also real. Real question, how do you do that? Everyone's looking at me like, you tell us. Has anyone thought about this? Or has this come up in you all's conversations to this point? Does this number surprise you? This was in 2014, now it's about 78% in 2019. And this is true in case we have folks who are working with undergraduate admissions, this is just as true for undergraduate students. So for online students and traditional native populations. Our funnel is based on this idea that people are going to request information. You guys all have a contact form on your webpage where students can put in information. Let me ask you a different question. Do you all have a fake email address you use when people ask you to put your contact form in? Let me say it again slowly. Do you all have a fake email address that you use? When they ask, you don't think that students have a fake email address that they use when you ask for this? Let me tell you something different about a contact form. What percentage of students start your application and don't complete it? Do you all know? Let me. 45%, 50%. Did you all know that that was the new contact form? That your best source of information for student prospects are people who start the application and don't complete it? Why is that? Because you've asked them for their name, their contact information, and they've already told you they're interested because they started the application.
As soon as it starts. So that's like when you put something in your cart and then you decide not to buy it and they send you an email. It's like,
Exactly.
Your cart
Is your card maybe like, or you're looking for a plane ticket, right? You're like, do you still want to go to Costa Rica? We've all gotten that email before. So I want you all to be thinking about, I'm going to keep pressing you on this, how do we have to change how we think about how we engage with students if this is the truth? Now this is research-based, we didn't make this up. This is the truth of our reality, of how students are showing up to us. How does that change how we communicate with them? Now, this one is one I would always ask people, tell me what you think this is trying to do, but I'll tell you, this is called a super graphic. So what it's doing is it's tracking over time how we've had this rapid proliferation of all the ways that we can communicate with students and all the channels that we can use to do that. But as I said to you all before, the real ultimate goal of all of this technology is trying to amplify the #1 tool we have in marketing, which is?
word of mouth.
Say it again. We had this meeting earlier. #1 tool in marketing is word of mouth. And all technology is doing is trying to figure out a way to amplify that word of mouth to get it to the most people possible. So the question is, as you know all of these places exist, and all of these things cost lots of money, how do you know which one is the best one to run at? How do you all decide that now? So if you're looking at all these options for ways to reach students with your marketing message, how do you know which one to use? How are you guys deciding right now? And then how do you know if it's working? So let's imagine something different. Let's imagine that I'm the chief financial officer of your university. And I know your marketing budget. And I come to you and say, you've been spending money on marketing. You're doing it in some of these ways. How do you choose where you spend that money? And then how do you know if it was worth it? How would you respond to that guy?
You follow the data.
Okay, which data?
Follow data based on what you've already done, but you also look at your competitors and try to determine what they're doing as well.
So then the #1 driver in terms of metrics is how many people we got in comparison to our competitors? Just asking, not saying it's not right.
Well, no, that's part of it, but it's not just that. You're trying to look at consumer behavior in general. So
Sure.
it's not just things that are relative to higher education, but just in terms of demographically speaking, what people are interested in how they try to engage with those things.
Okay. Other responses. How do you know where to spend the money and how do you know if it worked? Yes.
Depends on who your clientele is and who you're searching for. So if you want non-traditional students, radio ads would probably be better than something online if you're searching for like 30-something to 50-year-olds, etc.
Okay. So looking at market differentiation, right? So some of these things work differently for different parts of the market. I think that's absolutely fair. What else? How else do you know? Or maybe a different question. Why is this hard to answer? And we've all been asked this question before. If you do marketing for your program, you've been asked the question I just asked. Why is it hard to answer? It's intentionally hard to answer. Why is it hard to answer?
Because there's so many of them.
And it's ever changing.
Yeah.
Like,
It changes rapidly. There's a lot of them, and we don't all agree on what the right metrics are for marketing. There's never a broad-based agreement. When we have a marketing spend, right? Let's say we all spent $20 on an ad. We wouldn't all agree unless we spent the time doing the work of what the benefits of that ad should be, which is often one of the biggest misses in marketing. We don't all agree which of these places to run at, and then we don't all agree on what would make that a success. So you have 5 different people looking at it. I'm gonna give you an example of that, who say, oh, this would make it a success, that would make it a success. You see one of the outcomes, not the other, and then someone in that organization is mad. And we've all lived through that before. Here's another reason why things are changing. And this gets into the idea of the competitive landscape or the competitive market. What I'm showing you here is just this look that for a long time we thought, okay, our biggest differentiator is that we're not the for-profit institutions. That changed. Because now look at who the real entrants are, who we have to really compete with. One you've all heard of before, Southern New Hampshire University. I'll give you an example there of Southern New Hampshire University because every board member at every university is going to ask you at some point, why don't we have as many ads as Southern New Hampshire University? Or why don't we have the market penetration that they do? They spend $20 million on television ads each year. That's 20. How many institutions have $20 million to spend on television ads? That'd be 0, or perhaps 1. Well, here's what it meant for them, though. They doubled their online
Everybody
enrollments.
would if they doubled their enrollments, though.
Well, and they did, right, from 2000 to 2014. Here's what's not on the slide. They doubled them again between 2014 and 2017. So there's a lot of interest in this market. You see Central Michigan University, Liberty University, which has a huge presence in you all's market. If you didn't know that or not, a lot of students who would live in you all's area, taking online courses through them. And then there's a local competitor that everyone has to think about. But this idea about the traditional interests being in the market, we can no longer differentiate ourselves on our brand alone. We can no longer say, well, we are USC, that's the reason they come. Because there are many more people who look like us than look like the online and for-profit institutions that we were fighting with in the past. Here's a couple of other things I think that's important to think about. Look at this growth in master's degree programs in the United States between 2012 and what's anticipated to grow to 2023. What's also interesting about this number is, this is rapid proliferation. In fact, more growth than we've seen in that market in the entire history of higher education. Here's what's also true. In that same period, people earning degrees remained flat. Let me explain to you what's interesting about that, why that should be interesting to you. We've created more programs, and the thing I don't have on the slide is more people are going, but the same number of people are getting degrees. Why do you all think that is? And why does that matter for marketing?
Retaining the students you have.
That's part of it, right? So, but I think students are also telling us something with the way they vote with their feet. We have decided, and this is going to be where I'm going to go to market-based language, that the best way to create repeat buyers of students is to get them locked into degree programs. So if we have a degree program or certificate program that has a defined length and a defined ending point, we know we'll have a buyer over and over again. Now, no one wants to use that language in higher ed because we like to say, oh, we just want people to get degrees and credentials to be able to go out to the marketplace. But part of our driver in that, in terms of degree programs, is that we're locking people into an experience that will create a repeat buyer. When in fact, we can create repeat buyers without that. And students are telling us, because they're starting these programs and getting what they want and leaving, that they like that. The other question is, can you market your way out of a bad product? Solid question. Can you market your way out of a bad product? I'll give you an example. How many people, I'm older than I look, that's why I like being bald. Because you can't tell how old I am for real. I took off the true ring, so you can't count those either. How many people remember the Pinto? Remember the Pinto? It'll catch on fire. That's what it would do. What kind of marketing campaign can you create that will make someone buy a car that will catch on fire? Let's go back, we'll go something even more recent. Remember the Samsung 8? Oh, that thing catch on fire too. Right in your pocket. Can you market your way out of a phone that will catch on fire in your pocket? In higher ed, we will not acknowledge that you cannot market your way out of a bad product. Part of what this is telling us is, we have thought if we'll just create as many products as possible, people will just want them, because if we build it, they will come. When in fact, that is no longer the higher education market. So you all thought I was going to talk about slick brochures, et cetera. This is just as much about the product as it is about how you talk about it. Who doesn't buy that? Who thinks you can, it's just a marketing question?
I buy what you're saying.
Then let's fight.
But there's no real, especially now with some of these competitors listed here, agreed upon definition of what a quality product is.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's an additional challenge.
Whose job is it to decide what a quality product is?
And some buyers don't actually care.
So this is interesting. I want to, because this is tension that we're unwilling to engage in higher ed. This is an important tension that just came out because some people were willing to say buyer, but only quietly. Other people gave them the stink eye. Right? That's what happened. This is going to be a family reunion. We're just going to call it all out. We're going to still part as friends. Whose job is it to determine what is quality in higher ed?
The buyer.
Who disagrees with that?
Well,
We have accrediting agencies.
Ooh, I always love people bring those up. And I will own that I have been on SACS accrediting review boards for but do we all agree that accrediting agencies actually validate quality? Here's a different question. What's the public narrative of higher education right now? What does the public say about us? Too expensive. What else?
Overpaid and lazy and not, is very negative.
Right, it's negative, right? How many people do you think, and we do this research each year, trust the messages that higher education gives about what they have to offer? Give me a percentage. What price is right? Who thinks it's $0? Who thinks it's $1? What percentage would you all say of people who trust your messages? Let me tell you why I'm asking you this question. Can you market to people effectively if you don't know if they trust your message and you don't know what their perception of you is? Your marketing has to respond to that. So let's go back. What percentage of people trust our messages?
20 to
20.
25.
It's better than you all thought. 40% of people say they trust our messages, but it still ain't good. That's not a passing grade. But we have to own that people don't trust what we have to say about quality, and that we have been unwilling to engage, that the customer has something to say about what's quality or not, and they'll vote with their feet.
I also think, at least for the education profession, but a lot of professions, that those advanced degrees don't pay off the way they once did. So they're like, why would I want to pay that? And then maybe my salary won't go up at all, or maybe it will only go up enough that it won't pay off my debts for getting that. So
That's right.
I mean,
Well, and in fact, that means that we have to change our message, right? If that's if that's the reality our consumer is facing, have we created a response to that, either by changing the product or changing the messages that addresses that? Because I think a lot of us know what people are experiencing, but we also recognize that our strategy hasn't changed. We know that things have changed for our market, but we're still saying the same things. This gets to a product question I always ask when I come to institutions. How long does it take you all to get a new product out to the market? So you're going to offer a new degree into the market. Oh my gosh, all the faces. If you're going to offer a new degree in the market, how long does it take?
Year and a half.
Year and a half. Anyone say it's longer? A couple people say it's longer. Anyone say it's shorter? Here's what I'll share with you about marketing in terms of product. In higher ed, it takes us far too long to get new degrees out to the marketplace. And in fact, we often get new degrees out to the marketplace when the desire or demand for them is waning, because our process lags behind the demand in the marketplace. And then we use that as an excuse to say that we shouldn't create new programs in the future. Because it's higher ed, and a lot of us stay around for a while, and we remember the last time we had a big fat failure in the market. We blame the market, not ourselves, and then we don't innovate to create this change into the future. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because we're not going to solve this problem today, but I do think there are a couple of things to think about. You want to think about ways that you can make this process move faster. I would also own that this is much a political process as it is a structural process. So you have to have some real conversations about that, because it gets to the same space around marketing out your way to bad products. You have to refresh what you have on the portfolio, as well as changing the messages that you used to give it. The next piece is thinking about how marketing competencies have changed over time. How many of you in your departments have people who do full-time marketing for your department? So a couple. How many people use a vendor externally? A couple folks. How many people have a hybrid model? So someone somewhere helping you out doing that, right? One of the things I would say to think about is thinking about how marketing has changed, but this second bullet is the one that's very, very important. No matter who is thinking about your marketing, having equal attention to the 4 Ps: product, price, placement, and promotion. So I beat you up over product for a moment. We'll get back to that later. But pricing. How do you all price your items in the market now? How do you price your degrees? Are they priced consistently? Is there differential pricing? How does that happen? Some people are giving me the look like, don't ask that question. So I'm going to ask it again. How do you price them now? And why is that connected to marketing? How do you price your degree programs? Anybody?
We have a few online programs that they work with an outside vendor, and they are priced due to the market analysis. But typically, a challenge we have is that the Board of Trustees approves tuition. So if you're an online degree but you're out of state, you're still paying out-of-state tuition. So we have been pushing for an e-tuition or an online tuition, but we're not there yet.
So one thing I will offer as a leave behind that we can help with, we can certainly give you a value proposition and a proof of concept you can share with your board to kind of help to move that conversation along around how some of your competitors have moved on that, because that's true across most public institutions, but you have to have some freedom. I would say the other piece is that without the right pricing strategy, you cannot win in this market. And you cannot market away from your pricing strategy. And so folks around this conversation have to own that pricing is just as much a part of what makes a full marketing complement as the product or as the placement. Next piece is about placement. I think you all have a strong sense of placement. What I mean by placement in the market is who your competitors are and then how you engage with them. But how do what kind of data do you use to scaffold that now? So I'll give an example. People use Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS data right now around placement in terms of what's hot in the market or what degrees folks are going towards. You guys use that kind of data now? You use state-based data? What do you use?
Combination.
Combo? So I'm going to talk about different data sources later around which ones are strong and which ones are less weak. But one of the things that you want to think about with data is how fresh is it? And labor market data gets stale very, very fast. And that makes BLS data and state-based marketing data around labor demand challenging to use often. And we use some other tools. We use Burning Glass and MC. Because of that, you have to really scaffold that out. And then the last piece, which is the one most people think is all of marketing, is really thinking about then how do you promote the products, right? So what's your promotion look like? And there's an increased presence of third-party vendors here, but I would also argue that you cannot appropriately supervise a vendor if you don't know what they do. One of the things that we all have gotten into before with a vendor, I'll use a plumber as an example, right? So you have a plumber come to your house, he tells you all this stuff is broken, and that you need to get it all fixed. What do we all do? We just throw money at the problem. The plumber said, so we got to give it, right? You went to get an oil change. You thought it was going to be $29.95. The man comes back out and says, we're going to actually need $300 from you because all this other stuff is broken. But because you don't know how to evaluate that person's work, you don't know whether you're getting what you paid for or the degree of quality that you're receiving. So I would say there's a lot of work that we can do, even when you use vendors, to really understand what are the new marketing roles and what do you actually need them to do. And we have a lot of work on that. So thinking about whether you internalize that or use a vendor, there are some things you really need to think about and internalize, even if it's knowledge-based, so you appropriately supervise whatever vendor that you use. I always like to use examples or metaphors of how this has changed in markets before. One of the ones that's changed around us the most is banking, and it's the one that looks most like us. So I mentioned before that I'm older than I look. How many people remember what it was like to open up a bank account in the late 80s, early 90s? People remember? So you went down to First National, because I'm from Wilmington, Arkansas, right? You sat down with a lady, I'll call her May. You sat with May for 47 minutes. She printed out 50,000 pages of documents you had to sign. You might have gotten a temporary checkbook, you might not have. And if they had a debit card, you didn't get that thing until 5 months later, right? We all remember opening up a bank account in the 80s. How do people open bank accounts now?
Online.
It's all online. How long does it take?
30 seconds.
Easily, especially if you already have a relationship with the bank. When people already have a relationship with us, how long does it still take for them to engage in a new process? Same amount of time it was if they were coming to us for the first time. One of the things I want you all to think about banking is this. How has it changed when you think about the bank as a centerpiece? How has how people engage with us changed over time? Pretty dramatically. It started first with call centers and ATMs, but it's really moved to internet and mobile. We use a mobile account rep here, but a lot of folks don't use those as much here in the United States. It's more so internationally. But people are engaging us now without really people interface. Most of their engagement with the bank is thinking about ways electronically they can move that process through quicker, because that's what the customer's demanding. But people are still engaging with the bank in person, but around specific types of transactions. Starting a family, buying a home, retirement. The reason why I break this out is this. We haven't done a good job of thinking about in higher ed what parts of the system people want to experience electronically and what parts they need to come in for face-to-face. This got to the point that you made earlier about retention. What parts do we need to have that remain and still are largely online, and what things that we can do in a way that are large, individual, one-off experiences that people need to have with us. And this matters for marketing. This gets into the question I gave earlier around students' experience of us and word of mouth. How difficult is it for students to move through the application process, receive their admissions letter, and then start the first class at your institution? Have people thought critically that that is marketing?
Hardest part of a course.
Explain it again. That's really important to know. So that's the hardest part of a course. And in fact, that is and for a lot of students, that is one of our chief difficulties with them with marketing. Their experience interfacing the institution once they're quote unquote already in. So I'll give an example of a quote from American Express. It says, I haven't met anyone who feels they have the organization completely aligned with where the revolution is going because it's happening so fast and so dramatically. And we say the same thing in higher ed. Marketing is touching so many more parts of the company now. It touches on service, it touches on product development, and we need to break down the traditional silos of business so that they can respond to that. I think if you all heard silos, you thought immediately how that reflects on us as higher education. So let's think about who needs to be engaged around this work at the university so that we can do this better. So we're using a traditional program map, and I'm actually going to allow you all to spend some time telling me about how you all manage it here. But where you have the dean at the top who has these questions. Are these teams working together as effectively as possible? Am I getting a full picture of portfolio performance? Do we have the right specialists in seat and staff in seat to get the job done? And are we getting as much out of our budget and spend as possible? When we say these folks working together, we think that it's important for program directors, marketing, and enrollment management to work together to improve how we do marketing now. You cannot do marketing well if those folks are not working together in a coordinated fashion. Here's why. Let's say we have a new program that comes on the books, and it doesn't make, right? When I say it doesn't make, we don't get enough students, we don't reach our goal. Who do we blame in this model?
Middle.
Marketing. Every single time. Every single time. But I told you before, you cannot market your way out of a bad product. And if students on-ramp to your program is terrible, they're going to quit too. So you have to have folks working together this way to really make it make sense. Now we said that in any organizational structure, the things that are common across, right? You either have a shared service unit that relies on academic departments to recruit, an independent unit with dedicated marketing and recruiting team, or folks who are dependent on a central marketing budget to allocate a part of their resources. So those things are true across. Here's the question I would ask you all to answer. Take 1 minute with someone next to you and say, where do you all think you fit, and where do you think you have the most difficulty now moving the needle across the board in this structure? Take a minute. Where do you think your marketing and your processes fit, and where do you have the most difficulty moving the needle? 1 minute.
Communication are very different. I would say they still are expecting communications people to be able to answer marketing questions that are really more business. Those are business-minded people. So then when we say, oh, Catherine just put some ads up on Facebook, I'm happy to create those and put those, but really I don't have the knowledge to know. Like marketing people truly like look at your market analysis. I mean, it's totally different than what I get. But it's all the colleges are doing the same thing. Yeah. So, but I do think we're at least aware of that. We're trying more than that.
Take about 15 seconds more. So you work in ODL. So if you were going to tell me where the biggest pain point is, where would you point to? Pain point. The place where it's most difficult to move the needle across those folks.
Like Allie Bryan in the case of this new degree, or is it Katie Wolf?
But I can see where we're
Sure.
really.
We'll see in a moment. It always comes out.
I think we're strong.
All right, let me get everybody's attention back to the front. Everybody's attention back to the front. So, where is it most difficult to move the needle? Where's the pain point now? Yes.
One thing that we were discussing as we work in a college and among academic units, most of our colleges do not have marketing professionals besides possibly the business school. The rest of them have a me, which is a director of communications.
Right.
And most of us are former newspaper and TV people. And so they're coming to us saying, can you create some ads? Can you write a story? Can you put this on Facebook? All of which I can do easily.
Right.
But marketing, trying to convince academics that marketing is totally different than that without wedging myself out of a job is tough, because marketing is business. It's, and the business school does a better job of that, which is why their online programs do better than a lot of the rest.
Sure.
Because they have folks that know like how to set up I send out an e-newsletter, but they send it out with different headers to see which one gets opened the most.
So
and
A/B
they look back.
testing, yeah,
They do stuff that true marketing professionals would do, and we're trying to make do without that.
Without having that capacity, for sure. What about other things that folks, sorry, say it again?
It's easy to do that when you're operating as more than a one-person operation.
That's right. And it's difficult also to know what you don't know, right? So like what services are folks using across the institution? Because you have someone coming out nationally, but you also don't know fully what's happening across the institution. Absolutely fair. What other things that folks come up with?
On the back row, we talked about actually breaking down the silos and getting people from all these areas together to work together.
That's right. And it's related to what she just said, right? So
exactly.
You have some of this capacity and skill at the institution already. You don't have to recreate that wheel, but how often do you have an opportunity to come out of your own silo to really fully understand what's going on? Absolutely correct.
And we also talked about the need for remembering the 4 Ps, and is the product something anybody wants? I mean, you gotta start with that.
That's right. That's the one I spend a lot of time with on academics, but most academics don't believe me on that, right? So I used to work, I was what I call myself a provost henchman, right? So I worked for a provost getting things done that he could not do. And he had a statement I used to always love. He said, you know, Kadesh, we have 2 57-year-olds get together in the basement and come up with a program not having asked any 18-year-olds what they want. How likely is that program to succeed? Here's the truth of the matter. That's program development 101 in higher ed. Most of us don't want to own that's how we do it, but that's how a lot of us are doing it. Absolutely. You can't market your way out of a bad product. I've said it 100 times. What else did you all come up with around why these silos still exist? Let me tell you why I'm asking you. Go.
Yep.
Come
So I think for program directors, I'm thinking like academic heads of departments
That's right.
or an academic program coordinator. I think you have such varied desire for them to engage in this process that it makes it difficult. Some programs might be on it and working with you, while others are more reluctant. So I think that's a challenge.
It's also not clear to them, apparently, right? So what exactly that role should look like, especially when it comes to marketing, thinking about what their role is for that. Being really, really clear about that. Other folks? Yes.
Well, as a department head, what I hear from students in our online program, because we are master's degree, we have a campus version and an online version, so it's interesting comparisons. But the frustrations I hear from the online students are around, the process. It's like we're trying to force fit our servicing and handling of our online students into our old campus processes. And we haven't really learned how we optimize and design a process for online students.
I think that's very fair. And in fact, if you talk with students more often, they'll tell you that more and more, right? That I feel like this process is trying to jam what would happen if I were an in-person student into the online model, when in fact, they want a different experience. That's why they voted with their feet and went to get it. Very, very true.
Billing me for for campus healthcare when I'm an online student in Kansas.
Right. Right. And from a marketing perspective, right, whether we want to own that or not, that is a bad marketing message, right? We're going to charge you for a student health fee for a student health center we never expect you to use.
Yes.
That's a bad marketing message. And people need to, and so I always tell people at universities, right, we should say some of the things that we do out loud so that we see how they sound. Because we get so used to them all the time, right? So it sounds different coming from me when I say it out loud because I'm not here every day, right? We're going to charge you a student health fee for a center we'd never expect you to use. I mean, we do better off charging for a plane ticket to come fly to it.
Right. But we don't have a way of marketing their record through the registrar's office, who does the billing,
Right.
who does that, gone through all these conversations.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the reason why I ask folks to think about these silos and ask that question about raising the pain points, in higher ed, we spend a lot of time talking about, oh, we got to do better with the silos. Oh, we need to break down the silos. If you've been working here for 20 years, you've been hearing it for 20 years. But if we don't identify why they exist and what the pain points are, we'll never tear them down. You'll just leave this conversation having said the same thing you argued about at the water cooler. It's like whenever people change policy at university, right? When people change a university policy, what do? What happens when we change a university policy? Say up. So there's 2 number 1 goals, right? 1, we complain. What's the second one? If you've been working at university longer than 10 years, you know this one well. Oh, you ignore it. You ignore that thing to death. You say, I've been here for 10 years and I will not do it. They've tried it 5 times, and each of the 5 I said I wouldn't do it, and I didn't, right? The same thing is true of how we think about these silos. We think about these silos as though they're going to exist forever, and there's no way to break them down. If we own that from the beginning, then you don't make any change happen. Off my soapbox, here are some things you want to think about in terms of what some of these silos will create for you. The first one is thinking about elevating the awareness of the services that are available, but also the practices that are happening across the institution so that folks don't look for partners outside of the institution or vendors when there's some things going on already that you can learn from. The next thing is launching programs without enough time to create leads for enrollments. We've all seen this before because our process takes too long. So then once we finally get to the end, everyone says, just rush it out there. We'll get students later. You can't market in this way. This is what I said before, right? If we build it, they will come, right? The Field of Dreams model. That is gone. Students are voting with their feet, and especially online students who have significantly more options than we're giving them credit for. And then the last thing is focusing on single programs alone, one-offs, right? Or what's happening with one bad program and one good program doesn't allow us to really think about where we should make the best investments to get the greatest return. So I said this earlier, I was gonna give you an example, and I'm not telling you who this institution is, but this is a real institution. They had their unit VP for their continuing and online education unit at the university was asked to put in a half-page print ad in the New York Times. That ad cost $20,000. The marketing director says, okay, great, we're gonna have this ad, let's put it in a vanity URL, and we'll see how many students actually end up applying to our program as a result of this advertisement. So the ad comes out, the VP is ecstatic. Here's why. He recently went to the ACHE conference, everyone had seen the ad, they were all excited. They said, that is the best program in the country. You guys are doing gangbusters. The marketing director was furious. Not a single student applied as a result of having that ad placed. Has anyone ever seen a process or an experience like this? It is so critical to be clear about what your marketing's role is and what the metrics for success are before you engage. So you know if that's the right place to be spending your money or not. I asked the question earlier, right? How do you all know where to spend your money? And then how do you know if it's a success? That was a difficult question for us to answer because in higher ed, we often say, we'll just throw the money out there and if more students come, we're happy. That's not enough to really understand if we're successful or not. Here's some other things that we do at universities that are problematic. You all will laugh because you've probably seen some of these. The first one, billboard placement placed on the drive of a board member or university president or vice president as opposed to where students live. I want to ask you where your billboards are. Large airport ad budget for a program with local reach. Now, I'm going to go back to this point for online programs at state universities. What percentage of students do you think go to an online institution that's within 100 miles of their house?
80%.
80% of students go to an online institution that is within 100 miles of their house. Let's reduce it. 50 miles of their house. What percentage of students go to an online institution within 50 miles of their house? 78%. We only lose 2% by shrinking the radius. If you are spending a lot of money on airport ads, you are wasting it because they already live here. You don't have to catch them when they're coming in to visit. And the last thing they want to think about when they're going is your online program. Last one, NPR radio spot that reaches more faculty than prospects. Let me ask you a question about NPR. I love NPR, by the way. I'm their target audience also. What percentage of NPR listeners do you think have an advanced degree? Not a degree, an advanced degree.
80%.
93% of people who listen to NPR have a master's degree or above. They don't need your program. Now, if you want to search for faculty, great place to have a radio ad, because they're listening. But it's not the right place to have radio ads for students.
And you could argue too that your New York Times ad probably might increase their rankings over time because their peers who vote get to see the ad. But if your goal is to get more butts in the seat, then no.
7 new faculty members from this ad.
Yeah, so.
7. So this university knew what he
It's
wanted.
effective, it's just not effective
For
at
what
your
you're
goal.
driving. There you go. And this gets to be why I'm saying it's very important to be thinking about that.
One question, something like NPR, what about trying to reach the employers who would pay the tuition and encourage their employees to take a program?
Excellent question. I'm going to ask you a different question.
Okay.
How much do we know about communicating with employers, about driving them to spend on their employees?
Well,
In higher ed, we don't know that very well, to be honest, right? And we've seen over time a 21% decline in employers spending money with traditional higher ed vendors to train their employees. So what I would say is that the different question I would push back on you is, it's not a channel issue, right? And what I mean by that is, it's not about where the ad's being placed, it's about how we're communicating. And truthfully, employers don't listen to NPR nearly as much as academics. So still no. But good question. Yes?
So with the employer part coming into play now.
Huge.
A lot of employers now are telling people, come straight to us.
That's right.
We have in-house training.
That's right.
And with the consideration that K-12 is now producing a more advanced student that can come straight to the workplace and gain the specific skills for that job.
Right.
So it's like, it doesn't happen until they want to move up to senior management that they say, okay, now we'll send you.
Well, because we haven't built partnerships with employers that say that we're going to train your staff members, and we can train folks and they'll still stay with you, right? So most of the employers who fight us, right, fight us because they believe if we upskill their employees, they're all going to run out of there.
The technical college system is better than that.
Yeah.
Like at working with
They're better at having that
employers to train them in.
directly for a job in the market space, right? And we don't, and the truth of the matter is, we don't want to downskill, right, what we offer to compete directly with the community college because we don't have to. We have skills that the employers need that we are uniquely qualified to train on. We just don't know how to frame them. It's not a product issue. Now, this is one that's clearly a promotion issue. We don't know how to communicate with employers in ways that make the most sense. And I'll always use the example of partnerships versus friendships. Most of us have many great friendships with the business market, but very few partnerships. Here's what I mean by that. If you have a business and you go and ask them a question, what are the skills that you think employees need and what should we be training folks on? They'll give you one answer, right? And we ask that question all the time. If you ask people a different question, which is, what would you pay for your employees to learn tomorrow? You get a completely different list. We don't ask that second question.
I have an online question.
Yes.
The for-profit industry has been successful with education and business. How can we compete? It's from Tony Jackson.
They're really good questions. I'm going to read it, say it back to everybody so people can hear that. The question is, the for-profit industry has been very good at communicating with businesses to train. How can we compete? The thing that the for-profit industry has better than us is two-part, right? One, their entire business model is driven by the bottom line. So they understand how to move away from a bad product way better than we do. So if they have something out in the market that doesn't work, they move on quickly. In most traditional higher ed markets, we treat new programs like they're written on a stone tablet, brought down by Moses, that can never go away. So that's the first step. The second step is they train specifically and create programs specifically for audiences. They don't create a program and say anyone could buy this. Let me explain to you more about what that means. If you have someone who wants to upskill in place, right? So someone who wants to stay at their current job, get new skills to do better at that job, and you have someone who is already in a different kind of career path and wants to change jobs, would you create the same academic program for those two people? Real question. Would you create the same academic program for those two people? Do we? Isn't that what we do? We say we'll have this one program and it works for everybody. That's not true. That is very, very much not the case. And so those are two things that the online market does way better than we do. Good question, though. Here's an example of another problem we run into with new program approvals in higher ed. So we have, and this also happened at an institution, a couple faculty members come up and say, we want to have a BA in computer science, so a Bachelor of Arts in Computer Science. Once they say they want to have that, that credential is left unquestioned. They move through to having a marketing plan. The marketing plan is to target the broad-based tech industry. And then once the program is launched, they have a disappointing student cohort. Now we're telling you at each point at the bottom here are the places where they could have stopped to create this from happening. So first, they didn't do any market demand analysis for just thinking about what their credentials should have been. I'll ask you all a question. How many people want a BA in computer science? How many people want a BA in computer science? That'd be nobody, because employers expect someone to get a Bachelor of Science in computer science. Not having faculty think about that, it's a very small thing, it seems small. But when people are doing all their research online and comparing you against your competitors, not addressing this, bad for your market. Next point. That credential was left unquestioned. If they had went out and looked at what employers were looking for in new graduates, they would have caught that very easily. Next point. They were going to market broadly to the technology industry. What they found was that there was a large population of early to mid-career tech professionals that were looking for a second bachelor's degree. Now I want to go back to this point about second bachelor's degrees. Which is more popular in our market right now? A second bachelor's degree or a master's degree? Do you all know? Say, what's that?
Thanks, masters.
Do you all offer many second bachelor's degrees? So then why do you think you're saying master's degrees? The percentage of folks getting second bachelor's degrees is growing faster than the percentage of folks seeking master's degrees. Why do you think that is?
Shorter time to completion.
Not necessarily, because most of us haven't streamlined the process so that if a person comes to get a second bachelor's degree, it's easy to do. Here's why. What percentage of millennials, and in case you all think about millennials as 18-year-olds who are going to college, they're not. Millennials, the oldest millennial is 39 years old this year. What percentage of millennials, or what number of careers will a millennial have over their lifetime? Not jobs, careers.
4.
Between 5 and 7 careers. How many of them will be related to one another?
Probably not.
I heard a 0. It's like Price is Right. Back to it. 0, 1, 2, or 3. Give me a number. What do you all think?
3.
2.
1 will be related to the next one. 5 to 7 careers, not jobs. They'll have between 11 and 12 jobs. 5 to 7 careers, and only one of them will be related. There is a
parents are wasting money on that first degree.
Perhaps.
Because they don't really know what they want to major in.
Or here's the question, right? So these students are much more moved by their passions than any generation before, right? So I'm from Generation X. We just thought you got to get out there and get a job and work till you die, right? The generation before that thought if you get into a company, you stay there because you've got a golden parachute. You're gonna get you're gonna have a pension. Those experiences for students don't exist anymore. So we always talk about them in terms of maybe they wasted their money, maybe they wasted their time. The work environment looks different. But if we don't fully understand that there are a number of folks who are going to change their careers over time and would change their career with a second bachelor's degree as opposed to a master's degree, we're missing how we market and how we align ourselves internally. Let's move over to the last point. And this is the one you all will experience the most. Marketing is not giving enough time pre-launch to secure at least break-even enrollments. So do you all set up in advance of every new program what a break-even enrollment is? Do you all establish that? Is that part of the practice? Yes? A couple of people say yes, a couple of people say no. One of the things that, and I'm going to show you a couple of practices around this later, one of the things that's very important to understand is what is both the minimum and the maximum capacity for any new program that you develop. Most people will spend time on the minimum because you know how much money you need to make to be able to continue a program, but why do you want to think about the maximum? Capacity, but what does that mean really in terms of marketing or students' experience?
You're turning buyers away.
Well, and sometimes we don't turn buyers away. We just say, we got a whole bunch of people who are interested, let's keep taking them. What kind of experience do they have? A terrible one. And so we have to think about, one, what's the fewest number of students we can serve to do well, but also what's the maximum number of students that we can serve well, so they also help us to market our program into the future. Understanding both is critical to marketing. So we're going to move through, and I'm going to do this next part a little bit more quickly, how you market your programs before they launch, but then how you calibrate your resources across the portfolio so you're marketing in the right ways and spending your money in the right ways. So that's what we're going to run at. So we're going to start first with how do you integrate marketing into program development. We're going to move to how you get actionable insight from faculty, particularly if you're in a role where you're a marketer removed from the faculty. How do you get real insight from them so you have the right information to create the right messages? And then the last is how do you test new channels for viability and effectiveness so you know which marketing actually works and which doesn't. So one of the things we say that's interesting about marketing, and you all kind of surfaced this so far, is that for the faculty and for the marketers, they're like two ships passing in the night. You have folks who don't understand the process for marketing, and I would say that beyond understanding the process, how most marketing for new programs happens at universities is this. I run into Jim in the hallway. Jim says, hey, Kadesh, did you know we have a new program coming online? I'm like, no, I didn't know you have a new program coming online. So we got a new program coming online. We need your help. And then that's the process. How effective is that strategy for marketing? A couple people laugh because that's the process at most institutions. And we have to do much better than that. We have to really formalize this process so that people understand, one, what skills and capacity we have to offer them, but then two, what they need so that we can get that done. Next thing is that there's little trust in the expertise and capabilities of marketing staff, and that even gets into when you have an external vendor because we don't often understand well what they do. So that you can then really evaluate it. And in academia, if we don't know what you do and we can't evaluate it, what do? We just decide you can't do it.
No, you decide you can do it yourself.
Or I can do it better than you.
Yeah.
Good.
Everybody can market. I could put this on Facebook
Anyone can
myself.
market this, right?
Okay.
The next thing, and this one's very important, right? And I'm going to try to keep from doing this today. Our conversations are right when we start talking about marketing with jargon that people don't understand around the board. Or we all assume that we're on the same page. Like, for example, you all don't know this, but earlier today I beat you up on the idea of retention. And here's why. We say the word retention in higher ed, we all throw it out, and we all just assume we think the same thing about it. That's not true. When we say the word retention, it brings up very different ideas and very different groups of people. The same thing is true of marketing. So it's very important so people understand what that means for your institution and what skills you have around that. And then the last thing is, there's often little enforcement of established program approval processes. I'll say that slowly, because the faculty members in this room know I'm telling the truth. There's often very little enforcement for our pre-established program approval processes. We're like, yeah, we have this process, but it didn't work out this time. Let's keep moving. Cannot manage marketing effectively in that way. So I'm going to give you an example of a tactic from University of South Florida that we think is one that's well used. The first thing is they have created across their institution what they call an action-oriented service catalog, so that everyone knows at their institution, here are all the resources we have within our continuing online education unit, but also here are the strategies that happen across the board of our institution, so that people understand what's happening across the board, what they have access to, who they can learn from. The services have been operated, designed, and packaged based on feedback from the folks in their academic departments on their needs and how they've experienced it, and they use simple language to avoid confusion there. One thing that I want you all to know, I have all of this available for you online. You can actually see what they did. You can steal it, change the logo, put your own name on it, figure out what you do and don't do. Absolutely take this. The second thing they do is they have a web-based project request form. So when they start a new program or need help with marketing for a new program, they have a contact form online where you can go in and say, we need help with this thing, this service that you all said that you offer, or that we know happens across campus. Please help us with this service. Now, I'm gonna ask a question about project-based service request forms. How many people have ever filled out an IT form, right? So my computer's not working, you fill out the IT form. How many people trust that form? Think someone's gonna come and help me. Got two people, look at you guys, you are optimistic. I'm not an optimist. I'm like, no one's coming, what's happening with this form? Did I just throw this down the hallway or is something gonna happen? One of the ways that they have been very clear about absolving folks of that fear is that it assigns a contact. Once you fill out that form, it tells you who you're gonna hear from and the space or the length of time you can expect to hear back from them. So whether that's 2 days or a week, because they have attached what they know these items are to individuals at their institution. So if you send and say we want to contact for X and that belongs to Martha, you will know that you're going to get contact from Martha in a week or in 2 days. So it's very important, I would say also, beyond just having this kind of contact form that people can request a service, you also tell them who they're going to hear from and when, because it will help your work stream and understand where you have capacity to do that, but it also helps people to be less concerned and less picking up the phone to call you and harass you. A couple of things that they do there, and I'm giving you some examples here of marketing but also program development jargon that we use, that they have then de-jargoned for their folks so people can understand in a much more clear and specific way. And we have a resource here for that. It's called the Marketing Jargon Translation Guide. You all have as a leave behind, so I'm not going to cover all of this, but I think it's interesting to just look at this. So for example, around instructional design, which you all do in your all's department, how they have then changed that language so that people understand what it is you're actually getting. Because instructional design does not necessarily mean the same thing to everybody. Got any instructional designers in the room? Ever had anybody confused about what you're actually going to come and help them do? Which they think you're going to come and make their class for them, where you're like, that's definitely not going to happen? So this is, people are like, he has worked at a campus before. So we're giving you some examples here of things that we talk about that we think everyone understands well, and ways you can transition that so that people can actually understand how you're going to support them. The next example comes from FIU Online, lots of Florida institutions. So I'm giving you all examples of what they do around creating new programs, but I want to stop around this orange bullet for a second. Before they launch any new program, 6 months before the program goes into the market, 6 months, which means that this is before the program is approved, they're doing this work together. They have a full department boot camp where folks talk about how they're going to integrate marketing into the new launch of this program. Here's what happens in the boot camp. It includes all the associated faculty members, the department chair, the dean, and the leadership from their online education department. It's led by the marketing, recruitment, and development teams and the assistant vice president of their FIU online model. They offer a detailed overview of the process for taking a program online. So this is whether you have a program that's fully new and approved or a current face-to-face program you're going to move online. And then they dispel misconceptions about and set realistic expectations for anticipated enrollments. Why is this last bullet so important? I'll ask a different question. How do we set enrollment targets in higher education? How do we set enrollment targets at the university? Anyone want to tell the truth or should I demonstrate? So there are a couple of ways, right? So they give an example here where they present market research findings to inform and influence program development. What percentage of programs do you think do that? Where before they go out and start a new program, they have a clear understanding of market research. What percentage?
30%.
You say 30%? I'd say it's more close to 20, but true. So then what are other ways that people set enrollment targets? I'll give an example. We look into the past and say, what happened with students 3 years ago, 2 years ago, a year ago? Then we'll know what's going to happen with them in the future. Anyone doing that with setting enrollment targets? Anybody? Nobody's doing that? Nobody's looking at what happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future? Let me ask you why that, well, let me tell you why you don't want to acknowledge that you're doing that. Because it sounds crazy. So no one wants to say, yeah, we do that thing, what I just said, because it doesn't sound like it. We looked in the past 3 years to determine what's going to happen with students next year. It doesn't sound like a realistic strategy. I started this whole conversation with students are changing dramatically over time, right? Rapidly. So how well are we going to do at looking backwards to determine what they're going to do tomorrow? We're not going to do that very well. But it's still what we do. I'm not going to beat up on that too long. There's a third way that we do it. We say, I have $11,000 worth of bills. How many students will give me $11,000? That's how many students we're going to get. We have to do a much better job of this, and we have to start having conversations about that with folks who are not just the faculty in the department before we move on setting those enrollment targets. Let's look at the full process, and I'll go into more of this boot camp. So the faculty approach with a new program idea. The marketing team conducts research to validate the demand for that program before they move any further in the conversation. So they don't have any program start or go without having some market research. Here's an advantage you all have in South Carolina. You all are members of EAB. We provide market research. So if you have market research folks to do this on site, that's great. If you want an external resource, we're happy to partner with you to do that work. But having market research to validate whether or not a program actually has demand in your market is very critical because you can't market your way out of that. You start a program that there's no demand for, no strong marketing is going to change that. Next thing is the marketing team meets with the department leadership to present recommendations and gain consensus. This is very, very important. Why does the marketing team want to gain consensus for this kind of strategy before you move forward to launching a program? I'll go back to an earlier question. Who gets blamed if a program doesn't reach its enrollment goals? Marketing. And so if you're a marketer, you might really want to think about how you can get some consensus around these numbers before we get something out to the market. And they go into that boot camp, and then at the end, they sign an MOU and then execute their marketing strategy. Now I'm going to own, because I've been at institutions for some time, I don't think moving to the MOU first is the strategy that any institution should take, right? That's far too radical for most folks. But I would say there are parts of this strategy that you can learn from or adopt that would actually help you to move marketing forward. So I'm giving you some examples here. There's actually, you can download all of these resources on our website. I'll give you some examples here of what that MOU looks like and what they're actually performing in this space. The first thing you see is that after they launch a new program, they establish out across the terms for the first 2 years of a program, the enrollment goal, the enrollment minimum, and the enrollment maximum. Now, the enrollment minimum helps them prevent last-minute program cancellation. Have you all experienced this before? Programs that you said you were going to launch that you canceled last minute because you didn't have enough students. Have you all experienced this? Has this ever happened? Let me tell you why I'm asking that question. For the students that you've marketed that program to, who don't get into that program because you canceled at the last minute, you can't market your way away from those students. And they live in the community, because I just told you, 100 miles, 50 miles, they live in the community with the folks you're trying to serve. Really addressing that is very, very important. The next thing is, you see at the very top, they have assigned a program manager that ensures they're going to have contact with all the folks they need to make this work. Next piece is, I'm going to share with you all the questionnaire here. They have a questionnaire that the academic department partner in the academic program completes. They actually understand the positioning of the program and messages for students. And then they have expectations across the board, whether it's the academic partner or online marketing, who's going to do what. Now, why do they say who's going to do what as part of this process? So let me explain to you how marketing works to a lot of folks where you don't have dedicated marketing people. Anybody ever work where there's an office refrigerator? Now you understand what I mean. Whose job is it to clean the office refrigerator? Well, that's nobody's job. So what's in there? Penicillin, baby milk from someone whose baby's 2. Yes? We've all seen this before. No one wants to put their lunch in there. You cannot get this work done if it's nobody's job. It has to be someone's responsibility to move these parts along, and some parts of marketing firmly belong to the academic partner. Some parts of them can be done externally. So we've given some examples here of how this helped them to move away from problem launches. You guys can have that as a leave behind, but I'm also giving you, as we look across these tactics I'm going to be talking about more as we move forward, some ways to implement these things if you decide you want to work on them. So if you all decide you want to do any of these things I just talked about, I'm going to give you some implementation ideas to think about as you move towards adopting these practices. So let's talk about how you gain actionable insights from the faculty. You might have heard me mention before with FIU Online, they ask their academic departments when they start any new program to fill out a questionnaire. Now, before I start talking about questionnaires, I mentioned before I'm a researcher by trade. I both love and hate questionnaires, and here's why. And I'm going to actually fill one out later today. If you ask people to fill out a paper-based questionnaire, as an example, what happens with that? It becomes a plant stand, a place for students to sit if they come to your office, recyclables for later. So you cannot use a survey or a questionnaire unless you have an immediate need for its information, right? And that you're asking only the questions that you have a need for. In education, we are rife with questionnaires that ask questions we think we might need. Only ever ask people, particularly faculty, only the questions that you need. And I'm giving you some examples of things to think about with the survey, but the first thing is that it's mandatory to complete. Now I'm going to own and beat up on, as a recovering academic, how many things do faculty do that are not mandatory? So if it's voluntary, how many things do faculty complete? As a faculty member, I will tell you I did, in my time of being a faculty member, 0 voluntary things. Faculty members need some expectations, just like students. And so having it be mandatory as a part of their MOU for them was very, very important. Next thing is it's presented in context. And what I mean by this, they don't ask a bunch of marketing questions. They ask questions that faculty can understand so they can then get marketing messages back. The next thing is that it's sufficiently valuable. Often we will deploy a survey, but we don't actually go back to that data until it's too late to actually use it. So it's very important to both deliver this early and then use the information. And the last piece is that it's uniquely valuable, and these two pieces are very important. The faculty have the subject matter expertise that you could never get from a marketer. No matter how strong a marketer is or how great a vendor is, they do not know the language of the discipline in the way that the faculty do, and it's critical for marketing messages to get that information early. But then it also capitalizes on the faculty's understanding of the students they're already serving. So you understand about what you need in your market, but faculty have real insights in the students who are in their classes that you can't get without asking them. And we give you a resource here where you can actually download and then build your own faculty questionnaire specific to questions that matter for your institution. Don't just download and then deploy that same faculty questionnaire. Actually come up with questions that matter for your programs. The next piece I think is pretty important, and this is both important for marketing but also for faculty. They actually have the marketing team walk through the entire funnel for a student who's trying to apply to a new program through to enrollment in the course. Now, I shared with you all earlier, again, one of the key places where we fall down for online programs is not understanding that the way students both inquire about a program and then enroll in the program is just as important to marketing as is the marketing messages you put out. Here's the question I'm going to ask. How many people for a program they work in have ever gone out and tried to apply and tried to enroll in your program? What was the process like?
Actually, I was helping students do it at high schools, so pretty close. It was horrible.
Say that again
For the
loudly.
students, it was horrible for the students.
What was horrible about it for students?
They don't know a lot of the information they need. If they're frustrated and they have something bad happen, they quit.
That's right.
Immediately, and they go on to somewhere else. They don't have the patience. I mean, it's a very difficult process.
And we haven't made the process easy, to be quite honest. And I think, in fact, the more people walk through this process at an institution and understand it well, the better off you are to make it change, which is why faculty and marketing both need to walk through this entire process. I actually do this process for institutions. We call it an enrollment pain point audit, where I go and pretend to be an adult student trying to enroll in institutions and give them a whole report back on, here's where you had problems and here's where there are other best practices. But you should not be working in a program or serving in a program front-facing the students if you don't understand what they experience trying to enroll. And in fact, for faculty, you'll find that there's often language used to describe your content, your programs, that may be old or outdated or doesn't reflect what you're actually doing. Very important for people to actually walk through this entire process and understand what it looks like so that you can create change. And this is not something I think that you need an external vendor to do. You all can do this yourself. I'm gonna give you some examples here of things to do in those two areas around faculty insight, but also the prospective student journey walkthrough. But this one, if I was gonna say between these two, we're gonna run it tomorrow, this is one I think everyone should do immediately. Because what we talked about this earlier, what percentage of students are going to our website first, and that's almost always their first engagement with us. We have to understand what they're experiencing. So when folks talk to me about where they're gonna invest, and I asked this earlier, I said, well, how do you know where you're gonna invest? People are often thinking about or looking for a silver bullet. And so part of the reason why people don't give you an answer to when I say, well, how do you know where you're gonna get your best bang for your buck with marketing? People won't answer because they think there's only one thing. The truth of the matter is there is not any single marketing channel or marketing strategy that's gonna save you in this competitive market. You have to think critically about what you need to do across your portfolio. But I would say beyond that, this quote here from McKinsey I find interesting. It says you have to get in there and play and learn. The challenge is getting comfortable with risk. Set aside a portion of your budget, 10 to 20%, and really try new things. Here's the thing, we're not especially skilled, most of us, we're not trained as marketers at our institutions, and we are not exactly sure which channels work best. But if we're not willing to check out new channels or test them, we'll never move towards what's new or might work. And so one of the things that we're advising is thinking about how you create a culture of experimentation and testing, so you know how to test new marketing channels and then know what information to pull back so you can learn from which ones work and which ones don't. So I mentioned earlier, or you all mentioned earlier, that you're still connected to having a printed program booklet. Is that true? You all still have a printed, and this is across all programs or only a few programs? It's your program book's not mine. I don't have the answer. So some people do, some people don't. You haven't seen one in 3 years. That's still pretty recent. But are people still printing program books for students? So some people are, some people aren't.
Very few.
Very few, but some people are. So for the few of you who are, I'm gonna move through this quickly then. You can get rid of that. But I would say test that out for folks so that you can prove you can get rid of it. So the University of Wisconsin did something that was very, very interesting. They actually set aside a part of their budget and they produced the printed book and they produced an online book and they tested which one students and their families and or businesses were using most. And what they found was that folks were using the online information significantly more than the printed information, but they developed a strategy to prove that to people. Because here's what I would say is trying to prove to faculty that they should change is like trying to prove to freshmen and their parents that they're going to change their major. So have you ever worked with freshmen and their parents who come in with a major? How likely are you to convince them that they're going to change their major when they come in? They're not going to convince them. Same thing is true of faculty when they are committed to a strategy. It's very difficult to prove to them that it's not working or there's something else to do without real data or evidence. And this allows you to create a business case to really do that. So I'll give you some examples of how to do that. But since a lot of you don't have that, I won't spend a lot of time there. I do want to move to the University of Virginia School of Professional Studies, their process for testing new marketing channels. So each year they set aside about 5% of their budget, which is not a lot of money for marketing. For them, that's about $10,000 to $15,000 just to test new marketing channels. And they allow anybody at the institution who works around their online programs to propose a business case for this. Then the marketing staff assesses the channel's efficacy and they report the results to the faculty or to whoever proposed that idea. And the most promising channels advance, and the marketers avoid seeming dismissive of weak faculty contributions. This bullet point is very important. You cannot engage people in marketing if you ignore their contributions, but all contributions are not equal. This gets to a place where people have difficulty making decisions at universities, right? All voices are important, all voices are not equal. What does that mean? Even if you're wrong, I want to hear your feedback, but I'm not going to move on the wrong stuff. And this is even an example of a way to test that out. The next piece is it also creates discipline internally of monitoring channels' performances. So watching where you're spending money on marketing and then monitoring that over time. So they make a modest initial investment and then for approved channels for about 6 months, and they closely monitor those results to determine whether those new channels outperform what they're currently doing. So let's look at an example. This one I think is pretty interesting. I'm actually going to move over to the example of an ad in a journal. How many people advertise their graduate programs in journals now for online programs? Many, few, several? One of the things that faculty members will often propose is, well, we should invest in marketing in blah, blah, blah professional journal, we'll get students there. And often from marketing perspective, we say, well, people who read journals already have the degree or already in that discipline. That may not make the most sense. But here's something they actually learned from doing this with their online management degree. They agreed to only invest $1,500 in print for 6 months in the journal. This is why I think this is very important to look at. For most journals, the ad spend costs about $10,000 to $20,000 to run an ad, and they lock you into a contract. Because they had this process already in place where they only tested with small investments, the marketing director was able to help the faculty to negotiate a new engagement with the journal. They only spent $1,500 for 6 months. Once they actually learned they were getting new student enrollments, they decided they were going to invest an additional $3,000. Just where this is important. Before they were having this kind of conversation with journals, they would either be locked into $10,000 or have no investment at all. Well, they weren't going to invest $10,000 or $20,000. But having this space where they're willing to test created a different kind of conversation with the journal, but it also proved to be a fruitful investment for them because they were getting new student enrollments. We also have an example here of failing fast. I would just say the example there is, it's not bad to invest in a marketing channel that does not work. It's bad to invest in a marketing channel that does not work for the long term. Be willing to go out and test out new strategies to understand what works, but also then be marketing and then measuring those channels to make sure whether it's an investment or not. So what they learned is here, they invested $5,000 over 6 months. It didn't generate them the least they wanted, but it kept them from investing in it in the long term. The next example I have is from Southern Methodist University. They actually use their course content as a marketing channel as opposed to using marketing messages. So they're going to start a new program. They actually start by creating content or a single course that's named consistently with the content they want to design, deploy that into the market, see if it goes well before they actually launch a new full degree program. Do you all do that now? So if you're going to launch a new program, do you ever launch any test content to see if there's actually a market for that? Pull back and then learn from that. So I'm going to give you an example of how that works for them. So they knew they wanted to have a program in digital marketing, but they wanted to test to see whether or not they actually had the full market for it, or they could compete with those who were already offering that in their market. And SMU's in Dallas, since there are a lot of competitors there. So what they first did was they offered a test course called Introduction to Digital Marketing, named consistently what they were going to launch, which was going to be the Digital Marketing Certificate Program. They didn't have any marketing budget for this course at all. They just put the course out to the market to see how well it would do. They charged $495 per participant. They gave 15 spaces, and the course sold out. So they knew they had demand in their marketplace. So when they moved to launch the full certificate, one, they already had a clear audience of leads to go to from the 15 people who were taking that class. Two, they knew they had demand in their market because it sold out so quickly. So what they did is they had a standard certificate program marketing budget for this program. They had 25 participants available, and they sold that program out with the wait list, and the cost was about $2,700 per participant. Here's what the outcomes were. 75% of folks who enrolled in that launch course were in this 25. So people came back as a repeat buyer, even though they didn't know when that course launched that this was going to be a full program. And they received $45,000 in increased revenue even after the discount for those first 15 folks. So using test courses as a marketing strategy can work just as well as marketing messages alone, because when folks go online and search for new programs, what do they search out? So when people go online and do a web search for new programs or for content, what do they search out? Let's imagine I'm in a current job and I need a new skill to do better at my current job. What do I go and search for?
That skill.
Say it again?
That skill.
She said it very loudly. I want to see if people agree. She said they go out and search for that skill. This gets into attention about how we market in higher ed. Are students more driven by marketing that speaks to the skill they're going to get or the resulting credential?
Probably depends a little bit on the area of expertise. But,
Sure. Give me an example of what you mean by that.
Well, he just made a good point. In education, they're going to need that to
So
show.
here's what I'll
But
say.
for me, I just want like some Photoshop or
So
InDesign
I
classes.
almost always let nursing and education go first when we have this conversation, because if you're in a highly regulated field by the state, right, absolutely is going to be the resulting credential. There are about 3 of those in most of our portfolios. Everything else, it is the skill. Every single thing else, and here's why. When the student goes out and looks at what they need to know to get a job, you know what they look at? The job requirements. What's the job requirement list out? A bunch of skills. Very infrequently a bunch of degrees. And in fact, many of the degrees that we offer, the people we were trying to serve, they never heard of them before. They're not familiar with them at all. Now, is anybody here from engineering? From engineering. I'm not beating up on you, but I'm using engineering as an example. This gets into course naming. So engineering often has a sequence of courses, right? And some type of engineering. Studio 1, Studio 2, Studio 3, Studio 4. What does that course sequence signal to a student or an employer that that student will be able to do at the end of that course sequence? What do they know about that? They don't. Well, Studio 1 doesn't describe a skill, right? And so this gets into where I would say that this marketing technique is important because it also demonstrates to us something else we need to know about how we market to students. Students are using our course lists to understand what we have to offer. And in fact, most of our course listings don't clearly communicate to students or employers what they'll be able to do as a result of enrolling in that class. And that is central to marketing. Because these students are looking online for our programs first and making a decision if we're offering what they want. This is giving you the example. They didn't have this course on the books before, and they didn't have this credential. They offered the course with the right name first, and then drove toward the credential because the students were interested in this skill. They didn't care a hill of beans if it was a certificate or not. We have to really think about that. Marketing is not just about the message that we send at the end. It's also about how we structure or orient this content. So I'll give you some examples here of key lessons for implementation in this space. But there's some things I want you all to think about before I move to talking about the portfolio that are real clear skills for thinking about what you need to do if you're going to think about how you integrate marketing before you launch new programs. The first is ensure the marketing team is involved at least 12 months. And in fact, we say 12 to 18 months is the ideal prior to the program's launch to inflect program design and positioning and to develop an effective marketing strategy. You do not have to wait until a program is approved to engage marketing, and in fact, you should not. So if it takes you a 1.5 years to launch a new program, you need to engage marketing as early as possible. Next step, you have to ensure that marketing can beta test new program and channel ideas by giving a certain part of your budget that's just available for experimentation. If we don't get a more healthy appetite to experiment with new channels, we won't try them. I always use this as an example. I still think Facebook is a great place to go to reach young people. All my nieces and nephews tell me, no one young is on Facebook anymore, Uncle Dusty. If we don't get some healthy appetite about testing out what else is new, and if we think it's Snapchat, that thing will die and something else will emerge in its place. We have to have an appetite to go out and test things. Next thing is setting aside an expectation-setting boot camp, and we use the language boot camp here because that's from that specific institution, but I would say no matter what you call that engagement or that experience, setting up a time where those key partners get together to have shared expectations for launching a new program and what you expect to reach, super critical. And then the last piece, clearly articulate the services that are available, whether that's through a vendor or through your centralized departments, but also help people understand what's happening across the institution where you know you already have best practices. Now, I have not presented to this point any best practices from South Carolina, but you all have to believe, and I know that there are things happening across the institution that are best practices that if you bring together and share with people in a coordinated way, other folks can adopt. So now let's move to talking about how you engage marketing across a portfolio. I told you before that you have to have these three folks working together, program directors, marketing, and enrollment management. But I also shared with you some questions. So the first question is, how do I prioritize and distribute my investments equitably across a portfolio? Now, I told you before, I like plain language, I'm from Little Rock. That real question is, how do I know if I have 10 programs, how do I know where to invest my money in marketing? How do we decide right now? So if we have 10 programs to market, how do we decide where we're going to invest our resources?
You see traditionally, or what other schools have more enrollment in which programs and which have less, and then focus on the one where you can get more.
So look at some competitors, look at some traditional historic information, decisions there. Okay, that's absolutely a way that a lot of folks do it. How else? It's okay to say I don't know. The answer is not on the board, also. Not like that. It's not up there. How do you decide? I mean, you all are the folks deciding, so you've got $2 to spend on marketing.
Return on investment.
So we talked about this earlier, right? This idea that we need to know what we're getting or the best bang for our buck. Where do you find that now? So if you said you were looking at where you spend money on marketing now, what do you get your best bang for your buck?
I don't know what the university really does. I would say, looking at, like you said earlier, the audience, social media, what is the avenue or advertisement of our audience that they're using?
Right.
And then just find a small share of that market and see what the return is, and then invest more.
So testing out, so doing some testing, right, to understand if that's the right channel. I would ask the question, the second question is connected to this. How do you know which programs are best poised for growth? Our colleague gave us an example earlier of how he might think about it, right? So he looks at which programs your competitors have that are growing the fastest and seeing if you could run at that. But how do you know which programs you have in your portfolio are best poised for growth?
Looking for the best market, look out on BLS, market growth, where's the demand, where are the job shortages, what are the stats out there for open jobs and things like that. It's one of the things we look at.
Sure. So looking at where there's job growth.
Right,
and they can't find enough enough educated folks to employ. How else do you know, if you look at your programs across the board, right, you've got 3 programs in the College of Business, you've got 2 programs in the College of Education, how do you know which program is best poised for growth? Now, you may not have an answer to that, and that's okay. But I would say if you're thinking about this from a marketing perspective, understanding the response to that should drive how you respond to the top question. You have to have some clear way that we know, or that we believe that we know, which programs are best poised for growth so that we know where we should invest our resources. This one's the one that's hardest for us, right? From which program should I consider reallocating my resources? Because most of us budget in the same way that we do enrollment targets. We'll just do the same that we did last year. How should we budget for marketing? Well, everybody got $2 last year, everyone will get $2 this year. Not in fact the strongest marketing strategy. The last question, how do new program launches complement my existing portfolio offerings? So I'm really thinking about, from a marketing perspective, are we building a portfolio that makes sense to folks as a complement of services or academic experiences, or are we just doing a bunch of one-off things? So one of the things I see most often, and people ask these questions, and we've asked these questions in multiple ways today, right, is what is marketing? How do I know if it works? What do I need to think about it? Who are marketers? What do they do? But there's a lot of confusion in the space around what marketing is and how we do it, but also the difference between marketing and enrollment management and whose role is what. So folks mentioned earlier that there are data points that we need that should drive how we make decisions into the future. But the real question that folks ask is, which of these data points should I pay attention to? So you might have heard me mention earlier, I moved from data to information really quickly. How many reports do you all get that have data on them each day? Be honest. 4 reports, 3 reports, a bunch of reports with a bunch of data all the time? How do you determine where you pay attention? Most of us just ignore a lot of that stuff, right? If it doesn't move my job right now, then I don't pay any attention to it. If I can't do anything with it tomorrow, I don't pay any attention to it. And so thinking about how you change this and people's perspective on that is really, really important. But really it's about getting them to a place where they understand what it means. How do I know that this performance, or how do I know that this engagement with a program means it's best poised for growth? And then how do I know what action I need to take? So a lot of times when I talk with institutions, they talk about where they're going to spend their time and energy on investing with programs, or how they know what's best poised for growth, is they'll say, well, we do one of two investment strategies. We look at programs that are doing really, really well, and we invest in those because we hope we can just grow the ones that are doing well. We look at programs that are doing really, really bad, and we say, well, if we could only give those programs a little bit more money, Kadish, we could really change the game. Anybody seen an investment strategy like that? Because that is higher ed investing 101. Looking at the margins. We argue that a different way to think about this is to look at programs that have a mixture of metrics. And so what I'm giving you here is an example from Northeastern University. How many people have heard about Northeastern University's online programs? Northeastern is in Boston, Massachusetts. They're a wildly crowded market, and they knew that they could not continue to compete with in-seat students. So they ran very, very strongly at online students. And in fact, they've seen about a 25% online growth in just the last 3 years. In Boston, where you have 200 nonprofit higher education institutions in the same city. So for them, this has been really critical. So I'm gonna say that again, so in case you all don't know. They have 200 nonprofit higher education institutions just in Boston. And so this competition for them and this growth for them is very, very real. And so what Northeastern has done is what I call, good old Southern word, rack and stack. What does that mean, right? So we have looked at programs across value metrics that we have at the institution that we all agree on, and then we're looking at programs across the board. And you can see that we have masked the names of these programs over the side, and I'll explain to you more about why you might want to do that. What they do is they look at the average applications per year, application growth, the conversion rate, the average number of inquiries a year, the yield rate from that, the retention rate in the institution, the number of active students, the average annual student revenue, and the average annual gross revenue. So they're looking at this. Now, they're not advising that you all take and look at their specific metrics. What I will say is that they've agreed on as an institution that these are the metrics that matter, so then when you then address them, everyone's on the same page. Because often this process happens very top down, right? So we all got a list of metrics and we're being told we're being evaluated on that, and then everyone just fights the metrics. You have to have broad-based agreement on what the metrics are. I'm not saying whether it's these or not. I would also say that looking at this, they do this at Northeastern across the university, so they rank all programs together. I think that doing this inside of colleges or departments is a much stronger way to look at this, because you often have internal differences across the board. They don't look the same across the university. But they do this across the university. And what you can see is they focus their energy and attention in on programs in the middle that have a mixture of metrics. So they don't go to the bottom with the programs that are all doing poorly, and they don't go at the top for the programs that are all doing well. Why don't they run at the programs that are all doing well and say that those are the ones that are best poised for growth? You said it earlier. You said it again. Sorry? They're at capacity, right? So those programs, and often we find are your most well-subscribed programs, you're offering capturing as much of the market as you can possibly stand right now. You might do a few tweaks, but for the most part, those programs that have the strongest metrics are also operating at market saturation. Why not run to the bottom and scale those programs up?
There may not be a market for it at all.
Right. This gets to the point I made earlier about not being able to market away at bad products. This may be a reality that this is a product that's not going to do well. Now, at universities, we also have to own, we have what I would call mission-driven products that are not driven by our margin, which means that we have products that we're going to have on the books because we just are. I'm not here to fight your online Russian literature program. I'm just going to tell you it's only going to ever have 2 students. So we're not going to fight that out, but we're also not going to give them $1 more in marketing money. Right? I mean, everyone's not going to agree on that at the faculty meeting, but you need to have a perspective on this that really puts this into context for folks. Especially the people at the top, because the people at the top are going to always say, we're doing the best, so
we deserve more
give
money.
us more. That from a marketing perspective, that may or may not be the truth. And in fact, we argue that from a marketing perspective, it often is not the truth. Looking at these programs with a mix of metrics is the one you want to go to. And one of the things that you get here is you get a more nuanced assessment of a portfolio's strengths and weaknesses across the board. So you can see where you might be actually having problems with the numbers of, for example, conversion rate. You can see their conversion rate, they only have one program at above a 40% conversion rate. So that's a challenge across the board for their institution. And they're then marking this, so you see the red, yellow, and green based on institutional averages, and so you're seeing where someone's performing against the institutional average. Next thing is you get a diplomatic communication of performance. This is one that's very important. Data is not just data, data is politics, and we all have to own that. And so some kind of list like this, performed poorly and shared poorly, could really create a melee at the institution. So thinking critically about who needs to see this data so they can then act on it is also just as important as how you put it together. And so they give some tool characteristics here that are really important. They compare their programs across their full portfolio, they solidify internal benchmarks to guide future performance assessments, and they provide a performance of individual program performance from an enrollment management lens. That's very critical to understanding how programs are performing, so you know which is best poised for growth as you think about where you really invest for programs for marketing. This next example from Ball State is one that also does rack and stack. But what I like about it is that it moves from just having metrics alone to helping people to understand what to do with the numbers. So they have a faculty director that notices declining enrollment in their Master of Education program, but is not sure how best to improve the results. So their marketing director approaches the faculty for consultation and to educate the director on the marketing metrics that matter for their programs. And then the marketing director walks the faculty director through program recruitment and funnel performance in ways that might help them understand where they can inflect growth. Because the truth of the matter is, there are a number of faculty members who might understand what all this means and where they can actually create change, but most folks will need to be driven toward what they actually need to do with the numbers. And so again, they also use internal benchmarks to help the academic clients calibrate against other programs at the institution. They use conversion rates, and this is very important so that faculty understand what's actually happening with insight from performance across the funnel, and they give, for their programs, more historical context. They actually look at 3 years of data for people to see how programs are trending over time. The thing I like about this is that it communicates the context so people understand the trends across their enrollment funnel. It limits their focus. So for a lot of faculty members, it's going to be too much information. The way that they're actually producing this, they limit the focus so faculty know where they can actually have impact on marketing messages. And then the last piece is that it educates faculty so they know into the future where they actually need to spend their time and attention on what they can actually create change for. So let's look at an example of a problem they found and then how they addressed it. What they found is that they had a program that had a high number of inquiries without people actually applying. So lots of people were asking questions about the program, but people weren't applying to that program. So their solution, or the example solution, was to reach out proactively and consistently to all inquiring students and answer any of the questions they had in advance. So I'm gonna stop here. Now I shared with you all before that we're moving to a place where a lot of students are not inquiring. So in that space, where would you then call and inquire of students what the kinds of questions they have and encourage them to complete? Students who started the application and did not complete. So I'm going to keep beating you guys over the head with this over and over again because it's very critical to know where the students live. For this example, obviously, you would change this from where they started their time and attention for inquiring students who started the application and did not complete it. And then their method for following up was one that they agreed on that was not prescribed to them. Their faculty would follow up 24 hours after each inquiry and then send either an email or another phone call 4 weeks after that to assure a student completed their application. And the faculty director actually implemented a mandatory phone follow-up with all started applications in addition to the inquiries. Now, I want to be really clear about this. I am not advising that everyone say that if we don't have students converting, we then run at having a phone bank for faculty. This is the strategy that they decided that their institution would work for them, that their program director and marketing director worked on together based on what was happening here. We do have a couple of tools that can help you decide to do that. One is a communication plan builder so that anyone can actually follow through up on having that phone bank. And the second is how do you prioritize the lead in the phone. So we have a script there for that. But let me go back and ask a question about why you think this might have been a strategy they would run at. Why did they run at this strategy? Why have faculty members and not the program director or an external vendor call the students?
It's more personable.
It's more personable. So I would say that, remember, I told you before, I'm more of a stone cold marketer, and I'm marketing on what will work. I could care less about how people feel. So feelings are good, but this is not why they did it.
Faculty can answer the questions better than somebody who just has a script or something.
The faculty know deeply, and it goes back to why you want to have faculty information in the marketing, know deeply the language of the discipline and the kinds of questions that students are going to ask. And so you want to have them engaged. And remember the other piece I told you, 80% of students, particularly adult students, are searching out the program first. So they want to hear about the program, not about the institution. And the faculty are uniquely poised to be able to answer those kinds of questions. So let's look at how this resulted for them. Very interesting about the following up in terms of using data to understand how interventions work. So before they had this phone banking, they had 120 people apply. They had 34 students matriculate. Here's what's interesting. After they had the phone banking, they only had 5 additional students complete the application. But look at how it changed for the number of students who matriculated. So they thought they were going to inflect on getting more students to complete the application. What they actually inflected growth on was more students actually enrolling in the program after having been admitted. Why do you think this is?
combination of what.
It's what you just said. You just answered the question already, right?
They know what to expect, and they've got the personal touch. They've built a relationship.
Exactly correct, right? And so this gets to a place where, and I think this quote captures it, they spent even less on marketing after they had this intervention, given the program's poor performance, but they still doubled the conversion rate with less money. Most of us think that the only way to address marketing and programs is to throw more money at technology channels. Remember what I told you the #1 tool in marketing was? You all thought I was going to come here and say, here are 20 new things you should buy to market. They only changed how the faculty engaged with students front end in the funnel. And so what was also important is that typically at most institutions, once this happened, we would communicate this word of mouth, right? We'd just say, hey, Jim, look at that. It worked out better for you guys, didn't it? But presenting people data in this way, where you're saying you've had a 126% increase in matriculated students for the faculty members who all tell you the next semester that they don't want a phone bank anymore, changes how people engage in this process. The next example I'm giving you is to think about where different types of information around how students experience your enrollment funnel lives, and so that you get information that matters so that you create change for how you market. One of the things that we often don't do is think about how much our frontline staff who answer the phone and respond to the inquiry emails know about students that we don't know. The folks who answer the phone know far more about where students fall down on the application, far more about the complaints students have about those fees than any of us will ever know who work in the departments or who work in marketing. Not asking them really deep questions to be able to get that information in a way that's not anecdotal is a huge missed opportunity for us. And so we're giving you an example here of a way to have a 360-degree assessment to actually get the information in the places that it lives, right? So I'm giving you 3 examples. Marketing and market research knows part of the process. Faculty know another part of the process. But that frontline staff, right, what barriers prevent prospective students from enrolling? What in-demand programs do we not offer? The person who answers the phone knows every time the person who calls them and says, hey, do you have a program in X? And then hangs up when you say no. That person knows that information in ways that you will never, ever know. And in fact, there's a data tool you can use to actually track this, but you have the information already in your frontline staff. And then here's the last question, and I wonder, do you all ask this now? Where else are our students enrolling? Now, implying we often know. The question I would ask is, do you know students who you've admitted to your program where they enroll instead when they don't come to you? You all know? Some yes, some no. That's an incredibly important data point. You really have to know if you think about how to market. You must know where students go who are admitted and not enrolled. And so I'll give you some examples here of a couple of ways to implement these 2 different types of strategies as you look into the future. So now we're getting very close on time, so I'm going to pull up for a second before we run to the end and find out, do you all have any questions about any of the strategies I presented so far? Are there any strategies that you're doing now that you wonder if they work well or not and are interested in having some feedback on? That's always tricky, because people definitely want to ask it. People just want to know who's going to go first. Any strategy that you're working on right now that you're wondering, okay, Kadesh, we're doing this. How have you seen this play out in the market, or other institutions doing this? If you were going to change one thing about marketing for your program tomorrow, what would it be? Take 1 minute, write it down. 1 minute, if you're going to change one thing about marketing in your department tomorrow, what would it be? So as I close up, I'm going to give you a couple of examples of things that you can do inside your own departments right now to start getting people's minds wrapped around marketing, but also thinking about where you might inflect some change. So I'm giving you some open questions that you might use with your staff teams, some activities that you might do, and then some output that would come from those activities. So for example, if you're thinking about how to learn more about what are the background and motivations of our current and existing students, the activity might be to have a facilitated brainstorming activity to identify prospective student motivations based on the inquiries that you get for your programs. And then the output from that is to develop common student personas and qualities, and then strategies for diagnosing interest and pitching programs to prospects. I want to start at the top bullet for the output. Do you all develop student personas now across your programs? Or do you know what I mean by student personas? So I gave an example earlier about different personas for adult learners, right? So that adult learner who's going to upskill in place, or that person who's a job switcher. One of the things that's really critical to understand both for marketing but also for designing your programs is who is the person you're trying to serve. If I was going to ask you, since you work with engineering programs, who's your best positioned applicant for one of your programs? How do you know who that person, who that audience is? Have you done the work to segment the audiences out now? Yes. Send me one of them. One of the audiences that you serve.
One of the audiences that we serve.
Mm-hmm.
Well, our online program is a master's in health informatics.
Sure.
So it's a new field. So we have two primary audiences: people with IT backgrounds who are now facing, challenges in the healthcare community, and then people in the healthcare community who all of a sudden find out they're in the technology business.
That's right.
Yes, and they need to know more.
That's right. And I would say that if you're thinking about, so for example, you just gave me two audience segments, right, based on what they do. But I would also, I would add in an extra element, right? So there are also people who are going to switch into that field because they find interest there. And the program for that audience, while it may be similar content, is very different. And how you would market that to those audiences, even if you think about the two that you just mentioned, it's very different. But too often we think in higher ed that you can have agnostic messages and agnostic, and what I mean by that is programs that are designed for everybody. We can design this program for all the people who want to do healthcare IT, or we can design this program for everyone who does IT who knows they're going to come into the health field. When your audience segment and access to that segment may look very different, so doing some of this work to really build those personas, both for the design of the content, for how you market it, is very, very critical. I would say this last one also one that's really, really interesting to do. Asking yourself the question, what topics are students interested in that our existing programs don't cover? This is not about degree program, this is about skills. Not what degrees don't we offer, what topics or what interests or what skills do students want that we don't currently offer. Then go through the process of trying to create a class. So for example, we give the example hackathon, right? Or if you're thinking about bootstrapping or bootcamping things, and create new programs based on students' inquiries of their interest, and then have submitted proposals that actually address that unmet student demand. But again, this is an example of ways that you can actually do some work with your own teams to think through what's missing now and what can you learn from the information you already have access to. The next piece that we give an example here from Benedictine University, I'm actually going to end here, is thinking about ways to actually surface actionable insights from the industry. So you all asked us before about business partnerships, but I want to go back to the most basic level in terms of how we ask questions. Two example questions. The first question is, what are all the things that you all think that students need to know coming out of higher ed? Versus, what are the things you would pay for your staff members to get tomorrow? Both generate a list. One of them is actionable, one of them is not. We have to think critically about how we change that. I would say the last piece around this, in terms of how we solicit input, is to make sure that we share the way that we structure the content, not just the names of the degrees or the resulting experiences we want students to have, but actually how we've named the courses with businesses and ask them, if you had a student who told you they took these 5 courses, what do you think they would have learned? To really fully understand, have you positioned your content in the right way for the industries that you're trying to serve? So I'm going to end there. We're right at noon. I always say I like to begin on time and end on time, but I'm going to open it up now for people to ask me other kinds of questions. Anything we talked about, things that we didn't talk about, things that we should have brought up earlier that didn't happen. Gotten a lot of tactics from a fire hose. I realized I said a whole bunch of stuff and people were like, that's a lot. But you can ask questions about whatever you'd like.
We reserved
Till 12:30? Yes, I want to open up for people to ask questions. Yeah, for sure.
What's your take on a university having a centralized versus a decentralized marketing strategy for online programs?
I think a centralized strategy for marketing online programs is strong as long as it reflects the ideas that the programs are the reason that students are getting attracted. I think having a centralized marketing strategy is strong because it allows you to understand how you test different marketing channels and their viability in a way that's coordinated across the board, and people have a clear understanding of what resources they have access to. But I think you have to also make sure that the branding strategy for that isn't, we're gonna brand online, you're still branding programs, but doing it in a way that's coordinated across the board. but I think centralizing it has strong benefits, particularly because most of us don't have the skill set to fully and adequately observe and judge what our vendors are doing unless we internalize some of that capacity. Because even if you have internalized marketing, centralized marketing, you're still going to contract out some of those tasks, but you'll have a better sense inside of your marketing department of how well those tasks are being performed, which is just as important as having the people do the work on the outside. But that's a really important question. You guys don't ask me questions, I'm gonna start asking you, so it's up to you. Mine are much more scary than yours are. I'm gonna go back here and I'll continue. Yes, ma'am.
In the other universities and colleges you're working with, how long are you finding faculty are actually taking to build a literally one-on-one class? Here we're seeing anywhere from 3 to 6 months, and I'm just curious what other universities' impact on faculty are.
I think that has a lot to do with politics and not about structure. And what I mean by that is there an appetite at the institution that says we need to really be moving as an institution to the online market, or if it's seen as a one-off or it's seen as an aside? I would say that the schools that do it best have a lot of infrastructure so you can move them with 90 days and shorter, but more schools, particularly public institutions, and most of my career spent in public institutions, take closer to the 6, closer to the 9 months to really get a program online in a way that's not a bunch of static PowerPoints and a couple of videos.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
But that's a really important question. Yes.
I was wondering, you gave several examples of universities that are doing a good job. How did they make the case within their institution for staffing, building the expertise in marketing?
You just asked my favorite question.
That is the issue. Who? It's not a question of what we need to do, it's who is going to do it.
Sure. So I would say, your 2 questions are aligned, right? So should we have it decentralized, and who should do it, and how do we create the business case?
Yes.
The one thing you all have already surfaced is on campus the people who are able to get it done better than those who aren't, and the people who get it done better are the ones who have an infrastructure. You also have surfaced that. So it's not like these are hard things to understand, but they can no longer be anecdotes. You can demonstrate that. You can say, here we have programs X that have an infrastructure. Here's how they spend on marketing. Here are the results of that. Here we have programs B with no marketing. Here are the results of that. And now that gets to be uncomfortable, but if you can't get people to give you more resources with anecdotes anymore, the resources are too limited. You have to use data to scaffold that conversation. And you guys have the data, and I can help you put it together. But you have to demonstrate that in a way that's very clear, very coordinated, scaffolded by information. Because where you don't have an infrastructure, it doesn't happen.
Because you're not going to get it done in the typical academic department.
No.
I mean, because it's who?
That's right. Well, and if you get people to share that, they have things that marketing needs. Marketing has things that they need, and they need to work together to get that done. You're in a better position. But I would say also, we're moving it so far from the departments where the departments have what I would call the Heisman stance, right? You can't do that either, because the information you need to really market the programs lives in the content. It lives in the faculty. So there has to be a better connection there. Other questions?
We had someone online.
Yes.
Selena asked, you mentioned earlier sources of up-to-date data for determining program demand.
That's
Could you
right.
say more about that?
I am going to say more about that. So the question is about the best sources of data for updated demand. And I sort of beat up on the BLS, but didn't tell you why. Labor market data has to be fresh. And while BLS is a good place, national data, to start a conversation, it's not fresh enough to really demonstrate real demand. You have to understand who's hiring right now, what they're looking for right now, and what the job advertisements say right now, more so than just looking at what some of the trends say. I'll use another example of other types that you don't want to use. Why wouldn't you want to use an industry's trade association's data around labor market demand to make decisions on? So for example, the Journal for Aeronautics, why wouldn't you want to use their data on what the future of pilots is?
They have a vested interest in that.
That is exactly right, because they have a vested right. If I am the person who writes the Journal for Pilots, it's my job to make it sound like it's a rosy picture. So if you got you got a journal tomorrow from the Journal for Geologists, right? They say, well, the future for geology is sound. It is strong. There are 2 people who want to study geology, and I'm sorry if you study geology. I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm talking about market realities. And so you have to be really careful about the source of data, because that has a real position. This is also why you don't want to use state-based data. Let me explain to you why. And I worked for a governor, and I built some of this data. What is the state's job, or what are they doing when they describe what the growing fields are in the state-based data surveys around? They're trying to convince employers to move to where you live. It is not really for you. And so if you use that data alone, you're gonna get some really bad inferences of where to grow. I'll give an example. How many people remember energy engineering programs? You work in engineering, right? So they blew up in the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, right? So, because we had fracking in the middle of the country. What happened to the fracking? Well, it went away. We changed the government regulations. And when we started with energy engineering programs in 2009, we had 2. By 2013, we had 67. How many know how many of those programs had to close because there were no students, because people weren't paying attention to the real market? Another example is not health IT, but data analytics. I always use an example. In 2011, North Carolina State came to EAB and asked us, we're thinking about starting a data analytics program. Tell us more about how many MS programs data analytics exist right now. So we did a market scan for them. There were 5 programs that were Masters of Science in Data Analytics in 2011. How many do you think there were by 2015?
105.
183. How many were there by 2019? 304. So even in what we think of as the new markets or the emerging markets, a lot of folks will run at those without fully understanding what the demand is in their area. Because I would ask you, of those 304, how many of you think did real market research to understand whether or not they had the demand for that in their market? So there's 304 MS and data analytics programs. The number of graduates that are produced by the top 10 is about 80%. I'm gonna say that again slowly. 304, and the top 10 pursuits about 80% of the graduates. That's linked to 2 things. I told you tons of students start programs now and don't complete them, but also those programs that are in the top 10 understand their market. It is not about their reputation. Now, people didn't ask this question in terms of marketing about positioning of programs with online versus in-person programs, or how to know what modality works best for students. I was recently at UC Davis and UC Berkeley back to back. People familiar with Berkeley and familiar with Davis? Which institution has the strongest reputation? Berkeley, every time, right? They both had a program for human resources. They were serving in the same geographical market. Davis was outperforming Berkeley 5-1. 5-1. Why do you think that is? Any guesses?
They understood the market.
They did. They did something very different at Davis that Berkeley didn't. Berkeley's program for human resources is all online. Davis's program is a hybrid. What do people who work in human resources want more than anything else? And why do they choose that field? They want an interaction with people. The assumption would be, looking from the outside, right? Berkeley's reputation along in their market, stronger business school, programs all online and easy for folks to access would mean that their program would be better subscribed. When in fact, they understood the positioning of their program for their market, that those people would want some face-to-face interaction. So you could have changed the marketing messages on those programs easily. Berkeley could have pushed out thousands of dollars more in marketing, but it was about the positioning of that program that mattered. So it goes back to paying attention to the 4 Ps. It's not just thinking about promotion when you're thinking about marketing, and relying on that alone will not save some of the programs that you have on the books. Other questions? Yes.
I'm gonna try to word this correctly. So if 80% of online students are from within 100 miles of your campus, given our geography, that would be tough to find many out-of-state students who are interested in online programs. Are potential out-of-state online students turned off by very in-state centric marketing for online programs?
That depends largely on the degree field or the skill set, right? So there are some skill sets that are framed by the region. So you have regional skill sets that will speak to that region when you're talking about them. Others are agnostic, right? So it doesn't really matter where the content's coming from. You can frame it in the same way. You have to understand the market for that. And I know I've not beat up on that as much, but it really is about the demand you have and the potential customers, less about what you're good at. Most of our marketing at most universities talks about what we're good at, as opposed to talking about what students want and then how we help them get there. And the majority of the students in the online market want to understand, here's what I want, how can you help me get there, not what you're good at. And so if you take out what you're good at, you'll get rid of a lot of South Carolina language that you don't need anyway. Other questions? Did anyone hear anything that they could use, they could change tomorrow? Anybody? Everybody says you're doing it already right? So all these things you saw, you're like, oh, we don't need to do any of that. We're doing it all right. She's doubling over in laughter, by the way. Here's the thing I want you all to think about, because I think a lot of times people hear this and they think about marketing as far away. I truly believe that the capacities that are in this continent, things that are happening at other institutions, you all are able to do. It's not nearly as far away as you think it is. But you have to think about this work very differently than we've been thinking about it in the past. And the truth of the matter is, these online students, or when we're talking about online students, no, they're not just students, are the next audience because we are not producing enough new 18-year-olds to replace those that came before them. If we don't get this right, we have major problems for our institutions into the future. And someone asked, when do most people change, right? Sadly, most institutions run at these strategies and change after they've had a massive budget downfall, and people had to be laid off. What I would implore you all not to do is to be those institutions. 90% of the institutions I work with that are moved most fast toward these strategies are those who've had recent dramatic declines in budget. And we all know, if you understand higher ed well, almost all of us are facing that budget reality coming into the future. These strategies are things you can do now to inflate growth, and you must. It's incumbent on all of us. And I think that you all are positioned to be able to do this better. And as a partner, EAB is happy to work with you on doing that. But you've got to run at it. This cannot be extraneous. It cannot be someone else's job. A part of this belongs to all of us. Off my soapbox. Other questions? Thoughts? Trina, do we have the evaluations?
We do.
Okay, so I am going to ask you, even though I beat up on paper-based evaluations earlier, to fill out a paper-based evaluation. I care a lot less, my company cares a lot about the top. I care about the bottom. Let me tell you what's on the bottom. There are 3 lines on the bottom that allow you to ask me any question you want, or to say, we need this resource tomorrow, or we heard this strategy, can you give us something? Please fill out that portion. If there is anything more, any additional information that you all want or need, any more research or detail about anything I talked about today, please ask that there. I will be honest with you, I respond to every single one of those. So if you say I would like more resource, a resource on page 36, I will give it to you.